Okay, check, check, 1, 2. All right, how is everybody? Welcome on in, and thanks for being here. Even to those of you on the replay, thanks for being here. I appreciate you watching and paying attention to this case and giving me the opportunity to say what I have to say and taking into consideration what I have to say. So I appreciate you all being here, truly do. What you're going to hear tonight is absolutely disturbing. So let this be your trigger warning. Tonight we will be discussing the brutal murder of 2 children in Indiana and the putting together of the entire state apparatus to come down on a man who was accused of having something to do with their murders. And tonight, you're going to hear many things that no one should have to hear, many disturbing things. Things that should give us all pause. So let this be your fair warning that if you have a weak constitution or just can't handle some things that are beyond the pale, this is not the show for you. I am calling this the unveiling of the trial of Richard Allen because this entire proceeding from the months leading up to the arrest of Richard Allen until this very moment now has been done in a cloud of secrecy. The trial itself was held behind a veil of secrecy, the likes of which you haven't seen before. And on top of that, you are contending with an entire contingent of people who are out here in the public sphere with the sole intention of obfuscating, derailing, and covering up the truth about this double homicide of children. And please be aware, regardless of what anyone will tell you out here, this crime is absolutely tied to a number of homicides in the Midwest, particularly those exhibiting similar signs to what we see here in terms of the obvious signs of some type of satanic or occult ritual homicide. Now, oddly enough, that's the aspect, or those are the parts that they have tried to cover the most, as well as any connection to any organized criminal element involved in the trafficking of drugs, humans, in particular, children. It's my belief that this crime, should the truth be told about it, should the truth be revealed, opens the door into a large network that has been predating on children and will continue to be predating on children. And this network has international ties. Whether or not you can understand that, whether or not you want to see it, doesn't matter. Truth is the truth. And let's be honest here. This is one of the one and only channels that has received relentless attacks for expressing this very opinion from both sides, from those proclaiming the guilt of one Richard Allen and from those proclaiming the total factual innocence of Richard Allen. And that should give you pause to have some thought. Not just that, but many of my own inner circle, some of those who had been closest to me, had such an issue, faced such a mountain of cognitive dissonance that they could not handle the truth being revealed to their very eyes. And in this wide world, as unbelievable as it is, this disease exists and festers. And it's been absolutely hard on those of us who have chosen to tell the truth. We've shown you all the evidence of that. And the truth is that even those of you within the sound of my voice, whether live or on the replay, you're going to continue to have problems understanding this. As a matter of fact, I would say that probably a third of you who will hear this and see this will not believe it. That has been the case, and it's just a damn shame because I think many people don't understand how hard it is and has been on us to put ourselves out here and attempt to dig into this truth. And the fact is that this case is infested with lawyers and unassuming community members who collectively work together to steer this narrative away from the actual truth. And it's difficult. Now, I call them plants. And it became somewhat of a, let me see. Sorry about this. I'm trying to send you something. Let's see. So let's see. I'm trying to demonstrate it to you so that you guys can understand the gravity of what I'm saying, okay? So maybe something like this, so that you may have a difficult time realizing that when you're looking into this Delphi case, you're dealing with something like this. Not just one plant, not just two plants, not even 3, 4, or 5, but dozens. Among them, lawyers, both in this nation and internationally based. Now you need to think about that. What kind of case of a double homicide of children would you have dozens of plants infiltrating the community on both sides, intent on steering the public away from the truthful narrative of what happened in Delphi? I would really like you all to think about that because I know it's difficult. These people are not your friends. And I know it's difficult because, let's be honest, so many of you probably find your friends here. You probably suffer from real life connections, which lead you onto social media, where you find a community of people and you find people you like, and you find people who you believe have good intentions and are concerned about the same things that you are. And I know it's difficult. But these people are not your friends. They weren't in the first place, and they're not now. So for the neophyte, it's a challenge because you're surrounded on all sides and it's difficult to see through. And when I say cognitive dissonance, what I mean is that you don't want to see it. And so hopefully what you hear tonight will maybe give you an indication of the depths of depravity that are involved in this case. Because remember, this is not about Richard Allen. The railroading of Richard Allen is an attempt to bury this case. Yes, that's right. The railroading of Richard Allen was intended to put this case to rest forever, permanently, to bury it, to provide a resolution to the general public so that the general public would be satisfied with its bloodlust and allow this case to rest forever. This is the purpose of the prosecution and conviction of Richard Allen. Have no doubt about it. And so tonight, we'll be taking a close look at the recent appellate filing which highlights some, only some, just some of the concerning elements of what happened behind closed doors in this kangaroo court. And what's funny here, because, no one likes to hear, we've been right the whole time. No one likes to say, we've been right the whole time. But let's put it this way. We've been saying this the whole time. So it's somewhat encouraging to hear the appellate attorneys lay out a case expressing some of the concerns we have expressed. Now, keep in mind, the appellate process is only intended to address that which was introduced into the case record. So also keep in mind that there is so much that wasn't introduced into the case record, and that is a whole novel in and of itself, because some of that was the direct result of the sabotaging of the defense by certain state actors. The defense itself may be compromised, or comprised. Sorry, I haven't spoken in a while. I can't get this out. The defense itself may be comprised of at least one state actor, and furthermore was compromised by multiple other state actors. So, goes without saying that there are some things, those which the narrative controllers would label as conspiracies, which were totally excluded from the case record, from the trial, and the pre-trial hearings. Therefore, some will not be addressed tonight. Like I said, those things which the naysayers would call conspiracies, like whether or not the girls, the victims, were even there in that location on that day, like whether or not their digital forensic evidence and photographic evidence is actually legitimately real, like whether or not the family actually lied or not, or covered up, or protected other children in the community, or I should say young people, whether or not the police and law enforcement authorities on up the chain of command protected involved parties. This case is so much bigger than you can imagine. This cover-up is so much bigger than you could imagine. As I mentioned, it leads one to ask oneself, why? If it's just the murder of two kids, why all of this? Well, I'll tell you why. Because this opens the door into something which is a door that is that which will not be opened. Therefore, it must permanently be locked. And that's your Delphi murders. And don't get it twisted. There are other crime scenes currently existent, currently unsolved, which identically mirror the Delphi murders crime scene in multiple facets. You can take that to the bank. And if you don't believe me, you'll come back and apologize later when you realize I was telling you the truth. With that being said, think we're going to get into it because there's so much to cover in so little time. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you of something. This is the first joint stipulation regarding evidentiary matters. Okay? This says that the parties agree that the items referenced below shall be. Remember, when you hear this word shall, it's an important word. It means must. It's a directive. Shall be self-authenticated without the necessity of a witness testifying or verifying its origin, authenticity, or chain of custody. Now you think about that. These items I will mention shortly will be, shall be, must be self-authenticated without the necessity of a witness verifying origin, authenticity, or chain of custody, i.e. legitimacy or reality. Okay? Now the excuse for this is that this intention was to promote judicial economy through the course of the jury trial, which I have to add, remember the defense rested quite early. By the defense resting quite early, they negated this clause because obviously judicial economy was not an issue, being that they had more than a week of time left over. So it's a farce. Well, let's get to the list. All in-cell video recordings at Westville or Wabash correctional facilities. Now, you think about that. All in-cell video recordings. Well, where was he? Where was he tortured? Where was he threatened? Where was he exhibiting the signs of a deep psychosis brought on by the solitary confinement and torture? Yes, that's right, in his cell. Okay? All video recordings of Richard Allen outside of his cell, where he may have been tortured, threatened, beat. You get it? All door notes from correctional officers, inmates, etc. All medical and or mental health records provided by the DOC. All items collected at the crime scene. All items, put it in all caps for me in the chat if you don't mind. All items collected at the crime scene. All items collected in the search warrant of 1967 White Man Drive, which is Richard Allen's residence. All AT&T records containing pings. All cell phone records from Liberty German's cell phone for the dates of February 13 and February 14. The chain of custody for the phone. The chain of custody for the firearms collected at Richard Allen's house. The extractions of the cell phone. The extractions of Derek German's cell phone. The Harvest Store video collected by the FBI. Becky Patty, Mike Patty, Anna Williams, Kathy Allen, Janice Allen, and Jamie Jones shall be excluded from the separation of witness order. Without being excluded as a fact or rebuttal witness, were allowed to attend the jury trial so they can get their story straight. Now, think about what kind of defense attorneys would okay this. Now I'd like to bring up the predicate to the appellate brief, which is, I'm going to read some excerpts from for you to give us a brief summary before diving in. That appellate counsel had identified 10 possible issues for appeal, 9 of which involved federal and Indiana constitutional claims. These claims were broken into 5 different categories: the right to present a defense, including alternative explanation of the crime scene and other suspects, and the impeachment of the quality of the investigation. That's pertinent. The right to present a defense undermining the reliability of Allen's incriminating statements, which were coerced due to his torture and abuse at Westville Correctional Facility. The constitutionality of those statements made while he was gravely disabled in prolonged pretrial solitary confinement and Guantanamo Bay style waterboarding torture. The constitutionality of the search of his home, and other impactful, and this is important, erroneous evidentiary rulings, which points directly at Judge Francis Gull. Now, because of the many issues that involve analysis of evidence, this was proffered, or that were proffered, but excluded, the record is much larger than just the evidence the jury was allowed to hear. Counsel is aware that the court's preference is that litigants do not argue an excessive number of issues on an appeal. However, the Indiana Supreme Court has held that if an issue was known and available on direct appeal but not raised, it is procedurally defaulted as a basis for relief in subsequent proceedings. And we're going to talk about that with Elvis Fields in a minute. And the others who had confessed to this crime in the years prior to this, including Ron Logan, Keegan Klein, other individuals you know well off of YouTube, and others in the community. There was an extraordinary number of constitution and evidentiary issues raised by both sides to adequately litigate. Counsel has identified these issues that must be argued, but there's a word limit. Additionally, any federal constitutional claims upon which Allen would seek release in the future must be raised in a state court or deemed unexhausted and therefore unreviewable should Allen later seek the need to federal review. Exhaustion requires that a claimant make a full and fair presentation of his claims in state court proceedings to give the state court an opportunity to resolve federal constitutional claims before those claims are presented in federal court. Okay, so they asked for more words because check this out. This case is at least 10 times the size of an average murder trial. Think about that. 10 times, 10x. Think about how enormous even 2x would be. This is not just twice as large as an average murder trial. This is 10 times larger than your average murder trial. Another filing they mentioned The supplemental transcript was the size of a standard murder trial itself, including 5 volumes, 1,201 pages, and 7 depositions. In addition, there were many electronic exhibits, including 8 recorded witness interviews lasting about 10 hours. Counsel has been working diligently on this appeal with 10 to 12-hour workdays, but it is so complex that an adequate brief cannot be reasonably prepared in a short time, and the transcript itself is over 5,000 words. I mean, which includes 22 volumes, including a new supplemental transcript. The documentary exhibits are almost just as long as the 25-day trial at 4,782 words, 20 volumes, together equaling approximately 10,000 plus words. Counsel has simultaneously filed for permission to file an oversized brief explaining that they have identified at least 10 issues, 9 of which involve his constitutional rights. Failure to adequately present this would violate Allen's right to effective assistance of counsel and become an issue later. Okay, now let me pull this down a moment and make a side statement, because there are certain parties out here who like to argue that because one uses filings that they have made accessible to the public under the banner of martyrship and selflessness, that using those exhibits that they have published publicly in a manner of self-sacrifice, that would entail stealing their content. So let me just say this, that what you're about to see was obtained independently of the cranks, okay? Independent of the cranks. I have obtained this. You see the email, you see it spelled out here, and you see the date, Thursday, December 18. Okay, the following information did not come from the cranks, will not come from the cranks, and the cranks cannot complain that although we're allegedly on the same side in what we're trying to express regarding our concerns over this case, that they have an issue with me reading their publicly accessible documents. So sorry, cranks, this did not come from you, so no whining. Okay, moving right along. We're going to get into this. This is Richard Allen's appellate brief. We're going to start here on page 10 to save time. Now, fair warning for you, I will be going through this exhaustively, but we're going to focus in particular on what I find concerning, not what anyone else finds concerning, because although many may sit here and read this through you in a monotone voice without any pertinent, penetrating commentary, I guarantee you, I will. Okay, so what you're going to hear tonight is solely my take on this issue. Nothing more, nothing less. You don't need someone to go through and read this to you ad nauseum for this. Okay, what you need is someone to highlight the most concerning aspects of this, and that's what we're going to be doing. Okay, so let's move on. Statement of issues. 1, whether the search of Allen's home was unconstitutional. Okay, so if you're taking notes, which I highly recommend, get a notebook out with about 20 pages. That's all you're going to need. Statement of issues. Whether the search was unconstitutional and the resulting evidence inadmissible because law enforcement omitted or altered key facts in the warrant application. And we've said this from day one. They certainly did. Okay, Tony Liggett, not only did he alter and twist information to make it appear as though Allen was guilty, he also completely omitted pertinent information. Now, there's a gentleman who has been run off by the terrorist who terrorize this here. The terrorists running around, terrifying and horrifying everyone who has concerns about this case. They have run off many people, as you know. And one of the gentlemen they run off once said to me, Prof, there's something called the fruit of the poisonous tree. And that's exactly what this first issue is. What they're claiming is fruit of the poisonous tree. Fruit of the poisonous tree. Unconstitutional search. Issue number 2, whether statements Allen made while gravely disabled during a lengthy period of torture, i.e., unprecedented pretrial solitary confinement, okay? Unprecedented pretrial solitary confinement, whether they were voluntary or involuntary, the product of unconstitutional detention, therefore inadmissible, produced under duress or coercion. And number 3, Judge Gull and Nick McClellan, whether the trial court, Judge Gull and Nick McClellan, the prosecutor and judge, denied Allen his right to a fair trial, and they absolutely did. They denied him the right to present a fair and complete defense, to explain the crime scene, which Dr. Perlmutter, who has typically been a internationally known, famous expert witness in the subject matter for prosecutors, whether or not Allen was allowed to use Dr. Perlmutter to explain the crime scene and alternative suspects to explain the crime scene, and furthermore, to impeach the investigation. That's law enforcement. So number 3 here, judge, prosecutor, law enforcement. Okay, we're going to skip over this. Warrant. The Bridge Guy video, which they stipulated to, on February 13, oddly enough, check this out, around 1:30 p.m. Really? Yeah. Oh, I recall Ron Logan's warrant from Nicole Robertson at the FBI, which stated approximately 1 p.m. the victims arrived at the scene, right? And for years, the family says, well, about 1 or 1:30, the victims arrived at the scene, right? On February 13, around 1:30 p.m., Liberty's older sister dropped them off. Well, it doesn't really match what the state says, does it? Or the family anymore. Furthermore, when the girls failed to meet Liberty German's father allegedly at the specified time, Liberty German's family contacted police and an extensive search began, allegedly, although all the beefy volunteer firemen and law enforcement officers got scared because it was dark and they all had to go home. Anyhow, the best evidence, quote unquote, law enforcement had was from Liberty German's phone found at the scene under Abby Williams' body. Liberty German allegedly recorded a 43-second video showing Abby Williams walking across the bridge with someone, bridge guy, behind her. Law enforcement enhanced the video, yielding the following. Is that what we saw that the cranks released? Because remember, you still have not seen the original video from Liberty German's phone. The judge has unfairly excluded it from public consumption. That bridge guy video is deemed a confidential exhibit by the court. Now you tell me, why should that video be deemed a confidential exhibit? And why should the excerpts from that video, which were presented at trial, also be deemed as confidential? Is it to keep it from your eyes? And are you supposed to solely rely on an anonymous website that posted a similar video that was created on March 9th, 2025 to satisfy your curiosity about what the original video from that victim's phone shows and what the three exhibits that were shown in court show? Yeah, you were meant to be placated by that video that was published on that website and never ask a question. Four months after the murder. Now, here's a good one. Law enforcement interviewed Sarah Carbot. She told police that on February 13th, while driving eastbound on County Road 300, she saw a muddy man wearing a tan coat. Yeah, you heard that right. A muddy man wearing a tan coat. But somehow, after seeing the image of Bridge Guy on the media, Carba said he possibly was the man she had seen. Possibly. 5.5 years later, Richard Allen. On September 21st, 2022, law enforcement rediscovered the tip from Allen, allegedly. Remember, there's a whole controversy about that, and Little Amy G has shown you that on her channel. Okay, there's an extreme amount of concern regarding this alleged rediscovered tip. And if you don't know about that, you need to look at what has been demonstrated on Amy G's channel regarding this alleged rediscovered tip. Okay, please do. In the February 2017 tip, allegedly, Allen called and said he was on the bridge between maybe 1 and 3 and saw 3 girls. Allen shared his address, phone number, and MEID number, which is a unique identifier that can be used to track a phone's location. So why wasn't it? Why wasn't it? Can someone reveal to us something about Allen's phone and this MEID number, and where was his phone located? The lead investigators immediately started investigating now 50-year-old Allen. Yeah, that's right, 50 years old. They believed, which is a key word there, that the man the 4 girls saw on the trail was Bridge Guy. Allen still lived in the same house, worked at the same CVS in Delphi. On October 13th, 2022, when police showed up at his house, Allen agreed to talk with them. After riding to the station with police, Allen patiently answered questions about his personal life and the walk he took on his day off 5.5 years earlier. Allen explained after spending the morning with his mom on February 13, he went home to get a jacket before going to the trails. He walked to the first platform of the high bridge, looked at the fish, oddly enough, and then walked back before returning to watch the stock market at home. He explained that he came forward after law enforcement asked to speak with anyone who had been on the trail. The next day, a DNR officer, oddly enough, another DNR officer. Remember, the DNR were part of that search team along with the volunteer fire department, all of whom are questionable, including the local law enforcement. This entire contingent is the most questionable group you could ever imagine, and those were your search party. Allen believed he told the officer he was on the trail between noon and 1:30 or 1:45. He could only recall seeing the girls leaving the trail. I mean, 3 girls leaving the trail. That's 3. Being 5 years had passed, Allen could not remember what car he drove or what clothes he wore. He remembered wearing blue jeans and a jacket. When asked what type of jacket, Allen did not remember and listed all the jackets he owned: a blue Carhartt, a black Carhartt, or off-brand with a hood, sweatshirts, hoodies, and a fleece. He kept a skull cap in his jacket. He could have been wearing tennis shoes or boots. When law enforcement asked for consent to search, Allen expressed concern that they were making him somebody's fall guy by trying to fit pieces together that did not fit close to close the case. Oddly predictive of the circumstances, don't you think? Allen expressed concern that they were making him somebody's fall guy, trying to fit pieces together that do not fit in order to close the case, which is what my exact theory is. Close the case, bury it forever. The public stops asking questions. Everyone bloodlust is satiated, and everyone goes away, and life gets back to normal in Delphi. After a break, law enforcement returned, more confrontational with Allen, who became frustrated with being accused of murder and law enforcement contacting his wife and daughter while he was at the station. Confronting Allen with the bridge guy photo, Allen responded, "If that's taken with the girl's phone, that is not me, and look what I've highlighted. I have never met those girls before." Okay? Yeah, he did say he saw 3 girls, but he says, regarding Abby and Libby, "I've never met those girls before." They accused Allen of admitting he wore the same clothes as Bridge Guy, and Allen corrected the investigator, corrected him, reminding him that he said he could have been wearing a sweatshirt. Allen added that everyone has looked at the Bridge Guy photo for years. To him, it did not even look like Bridge Guy was wearing a Carhartt, which, oddly enough, is another thing I've said repeatedly. Okay? It doesn't look like a Carhartt. It's not a Carhartt. Even Allen could clearly see it's not a Carhartt. Everyone's looked at the Bridge Guy photo for years. To him, it didn't even look like a Carhartt. Finally, when law enforcement accused him of either being out there to kill the girls or introduced them to someone, Allen said, "Good luck finding anything that points to that." Despite Allen repeatedly telling law enforcement, "Arrest me or take me home," they would not stop. Arrest me or take me home. They wouldn't stop. They kept going. Allen eventually had to get up and walk out to end the interview. Kind of sounds familiar. Doesn't it sound a little like Kyle Robert Fortson, or Robert Kyle Fortson, or Fortson? Fortson, how many times did he ask for counsel? And they kept going and going and going and going and going and threatening and using the judge. Sounds familiar? See, this podunk operation, it was so bad that the cracks in the dam have formed. Okay? And what you're seeing is a pattern of abuse, a pattern of incompetence, and a pattern of intimidation and railroading. C, the story Detective Leggett told the judge. On October 13th, 2022, the state applied for a warrant for Allen's home. This is the fruit of the poisonous tree, as I mentioned. Leggett's probable cause affidavit concluded that Allen is the last individual to have contact with Liberty German and Abigail Williams. Really? How do you know that? Is that fantasy world? Is that fantasy world? Last individual to have contact with Liberty and Abigail is Allen? What's the proof of that? He also concluded that Allen is the individual depicted on the Monon High Bridge from the video taken from Liberty's phone. How did he come to that conclusion? What's the proof that Allen is the individual depicted in the video taken from Liberty's phone? He reasoned that Allen admitted he was wearing a blue jacket and head covering like Bridge Guy and was on the trail around the time of the abduction. And witnesses saw a man they believed to be Bridge Guy wearing a blue jacket. Detective Leggett implied Blair and the girls saw the same man because they similarly described his jacket. Also, Detective Liggett concluded that Allen drove his black 2016 Ford Focus and parked at the old CPS building on 300 North. He claimed witnesses, Blair and Wilson, saw a car backed into the parking spot at the old CPS building. Wilson felt, another key term, right? Believed, thought, felt, that the driver of the car was trying to conceal the license. Wilson said the car was a purple PT Cruiser, which for some reason everyone's forgotten about, or a small SUV type vehicle. Blair and Wilson drew a diagram each and had the vehicle they saw parked in the same general area and manner. Part of the story, Detective Liggett did not tell the judge. Blair's description of Bridge Guy did not match Allen. Okay, this is important. Get your notebooks out again. Detective Liggett did not tell the judge about the differences. Remember when I said he omitted key information in this probable cause affidavit, which is why, since that affidavit has been released, I changed my tune. He did not tell the judge. He hid from the judge. He concealed from the judge. He kept from the judge the difference between Blair's description of the man on the bridge and Allen's appearance. Just 3 days after the murders, Blair described the man as white, aged 20, of medium build, and having curly brown hair. An artist compared this sketch with which Blair rated a 10 out of 10 for accuracy. And we've repeated that ad nauseum on this channel. Now, if you were going to describe Daniel Pearson, yeah, it's probably a 10 out of 10 accuracy. I would agree with that. But Rick Allen, absolutely not, right? Take a look at it. In 2019, Tony Liggett personally interviewed Blair, who again described the man as slender, youthful, boyish looking, in his 20s to early 30s, not nearly 50, having no facial hair and with poofy hair like the sketch portrayed, which she still gave in 2019, key, right? A 9 out of 10. So in 2017, she gives it a 10 out of 10 days after the murder. In 2019, she still gives it a 9 after a 9 out of 10. At the time of the murders, Allen was 44 years old, 5'6", and had very short hair. Does that look very short? And does that look 45 years old? Secondly, Betsy Blair's description of the oddly parked car did not match Allen's car. Now, this is key. Detective Liggett also omitted Blair's description of the oddly parked car, resembling a 1965 Ford Comet, which we know is a Mercury Comet, similar to which her father owned, with sharper angles. And to express that, she made a drawing. And now let's compare it to Allen's hatchback. Now take a look at this. Look at the photo on the right in yellow. Does this look to you like a 1965 Mercury Comet? Yes. Look at it. 1965 Mercury Comet. As a matter of fact, I feel a little adventurous. Let's see if I can manufacture a miracle here. Okay, let's see. Let's see. Just a moment. All right, you guys ready? Let's do a screen share. Look at the yellow drawing, please. All right, look familiar? (1965) Mercury comet. Okay. This is what Liggett omitted or hid from the judge, this discrepancy. Blair did not believe the man on the bridge was the same man Carbaugh saw walking down the road. Tony Liggett omitted that Blair told him that the man Carbaugh described walking down the road is not the same man she saw on the bridge. Again, Tony Liggett omitted that Blair told him the man Carbaugh described is not the same man she saw on the bridge. Up here. So Blair says, that's not the man I saw, right? She says, that's not the man I saw. And she says, this is the man I saw. But conveniently enough, the state of Indiana made sure, absolutely certain, to exclude these sketches from the eyes of the jury because this would establish reasonable doubt in this story. After talking with Blair in 2019, ISP issued a press release distinguishing the man Carbaugh saw from the man on the bridge. The ISP explained that the men are not the same person and that Blair's sketch is representative of the face of the person captured in the video. Okay, so to prove that to you, allow me to take a little detour here because we're going to do everything thoroughly, right? So take a look at this. 2019. Multi-agency task force clarifies points about Delphi murder suspects' sketches. Delphi, Indiana. In the early days and months of the Delphi murders investigation, information was developed about suspect descriptions. It was initially believed that the sketch that has been in the public view over the last 2 years of a person in the age range of his 40s to 50s was a person of interest in this murder investigation. Now, as the investigation has, what's the word? Matured. And past information has been, what's the word? Reassessed. It is the belief of investigators with the multi-agency task force that the person depicted in the sketch released on April 22nd, the young guy, more accurately represents the person wanted for the murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. It's important to distinguish these points about the two sketches. Point number one, they are not the same person. They're not the same person. Point number two, the person depicted in the originally released sketch, the old guy sketch, is not presently a person of interest in this investigation. Point number three, the sketch released on April 22nd, 2019, the young guy sketch, is representative of the face of the person captured in the video on Liberty German's cell phone as he was walking on the high bridge. Point number four, the person in the sketch released on April 22nd, the young guy, is described as having a youthful appearance, but could fall in the age range from his 20s to 30s. Point number five, this person's appearance could look different today if he has grown a mustache, beard, or let his hair grow longer or cut his hair shorter than depicted in the sketch. Members of the Delphi community should reflect back on people they know in the community that look similar to the sketch released on April 22nd, the young guy sketch, especially if that person has changed their appearance since the murders occurred in February of 2017. And I did a little snarky thing. I put some highlights around the actual important points here. They are not the same person. The person depicted in the original sketch, the old guy, is not presently a person of interest. Okay, et cetera, et cetera. Let's get back to work. Point number 4. Karba said the man walking down the road was wearing a tan coat. Tan coat. Detective Liggett also made false statements in his affidavit. He claimed that an interview was done of Sarah Karba in 2017, and she stated she saw a man wearing a blue colored jacket and was muddy and bloody. False. In her 2017 interview, Karba did not describe the man as bloody, only muddy. She said he was wearing a tan jacket. Oh, let's see. Imagine I'm wearing a white sweater. Today I'm wearing a black sweater. What if someone would arrest me and piece together a probable cause affidavit? And although I have, at this time, a black sweater on, they would alter that and transform it into a white sweater. Because black is just as far away from white as tan is from blue. Alan never said he was wearing a blue Carhartt, and his wife said Alan had purchased his current Carhartt a couple years earlier. Detective Liggett falsely stated, this is lie number 2, that Alan said he was wearing a black or blue Carhartt with a hood and head covering. Alan told investigators he did not know what he was wearing, and it could have been anything from a Carhartt to a sweatshirt, and he kept a skull cap in his jacket. Although Alan's wife said he had a blue Carhartt in 2022, Liggett left out or omitted the fact that she said Alan purchased that coat a couple years ago. So what we call this here is stacking the deck. Fabricating probable cause with omissions, lies, and obfuscation. It's called stacking the deck. The warrant. The trial court issued the warrant. Law enforcement seized from Alan's home multiple items, including a gun, a 6-hour, okay, several knives, casings, and the Carhartt type jacket with a white and yellow patch on the front pocket. These items featured prominently during Alan's trial. And let's be real here. You know why that stuff was put forward? They knew they weren't going to include that in trial because it was BS. But you know what they did it for? Because they knew the people on the internet, i.e. the troll farm and the state shills who were running with this narrative that Alan was absolutely guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, they were able to use things like a motorcycle cover, like a water bottle, like a gun, like a bunch of knives, like a box of cell phones, and like a Carhartt jacket to turn Alan into the monster on the Monon High Bridge, which is the whole point of this thing. This entire thing has been fabricated for public consumption because the public has to go along with this in order for it to work. So many of the elements that were included in this effort were not meant for the court of law. They were meant for the court of public opinion. And you can take that to the bank. Remember, my opinion is that they never intended to go to trial. This was never supposed to go this far. This is the problem that was created by Alan's refusal to take a plea deal, because the entire schema here was to put together a stack of fabricated evidence, combine it with torture and intimidation and death threats to Alan and his family while in Westville, and use that to back him to a corner and force him to take a plea deal. When he refused to bend to that will, They were forced then to take this thing to trial, which puts them at risk of this very thing we're addressing tonight, which is the truth coming to the surface. You see? Allen denies the bullet is his, that he was bridge guy or had anything to do with the murders. At the scene, officers found an unspent, unfired 40 caliber Smith and Wesson cartridge near Liberty's right ankle. Let me remind you that at the time that they were looking at this bullet, what they had determined in their own estimation was that this particular round had been cycled through either a 40 caliber Smith and Wesson handgun or a Sig Sauer 40 caliber handgun, meaning whoever had this damn round in their gun before it came out either owned a 40 caliber Smith and Wesson or a 40 caliber Sig. Now you just hold on to that piece of information, that crumb, because we're going to get back to why that matters in a moment. When ISP, now before we go any further, that should put the brakes on it for you, okay? ISP. Remember who's running this cover up, okay? When ISP analyst Melissa Oberg cycled the 6 cartridges through Allen's gun, pertinent information here. She did not find any marks that matched the marks on the cycled round. That's right. When she cycled 6 cartridges through Allen's gun, she found 0 marks that matched the marks on that cycled round found at the crime scene. Thus, she could not establish a link between Allen's gun and the unspent round at the crime scene. Are you guys aware of that? I know there are many newcomers, okay? She could not establish a link between Allen's gun and the unspent round. Oberg then decided, in her geniusness, to fire the cartridges from Allen's gun. She then compared the markings on the spent cartridges to the markings on the unspent cartridges, a move unknown in the field of ballistics, which is already questionable enough as it stands. She then concluded that Allen's gun was the source of some of the markings on the unspent cartridge at the murder scene. After learning of Oberg's conclusion, law enforcement interrogated Allen again for about an hour and a half. Holman accused him of killing Abby and Liberty, or at least being involved. Allen explained the very day the police asked anyone on the trail to come forward, that is what he did. I went for a walk on the trail and went home. I did not murder 2 little girls. Detective Holman repeatedly confronted Allen with Oberg's conclusion that the marks on the case and at the scene matched his gun. It's the science, okay? Each time Allen denied that the bullet at the scene was from his gun. Holman claimed the methodology was scientific and like fingerprints. You can't make this shit up. There is no way on earth that you can make up what this state apparatus did to Richard Allen. Makes you wonder what they were so afraid of that they had to go to these lengths to do this. And it's my opinion that this is going to be their undoing. Exhausted and frustrated by Detective Holman's relentless accusations. Remember, like I said, same he did to Fortson, right? Same thing he did to Fortson, who went and blew his own head off. Exhausted and frustrated by Holman's relentless accusations and bullying that he murdered Abigail and Liberty, Allen consistently said he could not tell him what happened to the girls because he does not know. Despite Holman's lying about experts identifying Allen and his voice in the video, Allen continued to deny he was Bridge Guy. Detective Holman tried a different lie, saying that 5 witnesses saw Richard Allen with Liberty and Abigail Williams and a gun. So put this together. After a series of lies, he says 5 different witnesses saw you with the girls and a gun. Again, Allen said it did not happen, and I don't care how stressed out I get. I'm not going to admit to doing something I had nothing to do with. And that's what has saved him. Because remember that I said the intention here was to coerce him into a plea deal. But he was belligerent, and he didn't care how stressed. He wasn't going to admit to doing something he had nothing to do with. That's, of course, until the death threats, the beatings, the eating shit, and the Haldol kicked in under an MK nurse, but we'll get to that. Holman tried to use Allen's depression against him, claiming it was because he killed 2 little girls. That did not work either. Holman even used Allen's wife as an interrogation tool. While Allen was being interrogated, ISP told her that the bullet at the scene matched her husband's gun. They also told her some other unacceptable things. You know what I mean? Explicit. They made Kathy very uncomfortable. And then they brought her in to see Allen, and he hugged her and said, "It's going to be all right." While left alone together, she asked how his bullet got at the scene, and he repeated what he told Holman. "I'm not going to say something I did not do, and I can't explain something I don't understand." What kind of guilty person would use that phrase, "don't understand"? Think about that. What kind of guilty person would actually would think to say, "I'm not going to explain something I don't understand"? I know that no bullet from my gun was connected with the murder in any way, shape, or form. And ISP lied to Allen's wife, telling her that a witness identified Allen. Allen assured her they're not going to get away with this and told her, "I'm sorry you're having to hurt. I'm sorry." All right. Now, let me think how I want to go about this. Okay. I have to put this together. Okay, I'll keep going. Solitary confinement. Just a few days after the 50-year-old Allen was arrested for the first time in his life, he was sent to IDOC as a safekeeper. IDOC transferred him to Westville, a maximum security segregation unit for the worst of the worst. The movies refer to it as the hole, used mostly to punish. Allen was the first safekeeper in any IDOC employee's memory to be placed in Westville. Think about that. I made note of that before about a year ago. Think of that. The first person, pretrial detainee, to be placed in Westville for safekeeping in any IDOC employee's memory. Pretrial safekeepers with mental health issues are usually placed in a mental health unit where Richard Allen should have been placed. The IDOC knew Allen had a major depressive disorder and was hospitalized in 2019 for suicidal ideations. He received a D mental health code, the second most severe, a D, second most severe mental health code, entitling him to 1 out-of-cell visit with the psychologist weekly. During these visits, Allen was shackled and confined in a 3-by-3-foot cage, separating him from the psychologist. Allen had no face-to-face interaction unless shackled or separated by bars. Outside his cell, he was restrained with leg irons, handcuffs, and a belly chain on a lead with the shock vest. And you know what's funny about that? He's still a pre-trial detainee at this time, just like you or I could be at any moment. Other Westville inmates in general population live in dorms, played games, ate together, watched TV, and moved more freely about the facility. Alan was placed in a strip cell, stripped of everything but the bare necessities. He had to put on a paper smock, for lack of a better term. Alan's cell was 8x4 and a 12.5, with a camera, mattress on a concrete slab, and a bug infestation. And there's records of it, by the way, for those who will say that's not true. Yeah, it's there are multiple records, as you can see here, of it. His only view was a narrow window facing a razor wire fence. Meals were passed through the door slot, and he ate alone on the floor or bed. Alan was recorded 24/7 with suicide companions outside his cell door, writing down his statements and behavior. And guards with video cameras filming his showers, movements outside the cells, and attorneys' meetings. Hey, for all of you due process lovers out there, is it ever okay to film attorney-client conversations and meetings? Alan was recorded 24/7. IDOC knew solitary confinement could worsen Alan's level 5 or level D MDD and even cause psychosis. And their policy restricts the time inmates with serious mental illnesses can stay in solitary to up to 30 days. Now listen to that. IDOC knew that solitary confinement could have worsened Alan's major depressive disorder and caused psychosis. And their policy restricts the time that actual inmates with serious mental illnesses can stay in solitary to a limit of 30 days. But in IDOC, they didn't apply that policy to Mr. Allen, who was merely a pretrial detainee, and he remained in the most secure fucking solitary cell in Westville for 13 months. There it is. There it is. 13 months. 13 months. Alan's decompensation. On arrival at Westville in November 2022, Alan appeared like a deer in headlights, but was coherent, quiet, and weighed 180 pounds. By April 2023, which is less than a year later, he weighed 135 pounds, was psychotic, and gravely disabled. Early in custody, Alan maintained innocence and believed solitary was meant to tear him down. He's highly predictive with all of his concerns. He told the MK Ultra prison psychologist, Dr. Monica Walla, that he felt like a broken man after 2 weeks. Alan described a quiet, normal life previously. Alan was extremely and still is extremely devoted to his wife. On November 14th, 2022, he emotionally told her, "If this becomes too much for you to call the detectives and I will tell them whatever they want to know." By January 26, 2023, Alan was expressing paranoia. In late March and early April, around the time Alan received his discovery and met with his attorneys, Alan's behavior suddenly worsened. Guards thought he was acting up. He refused meals, became nonsensical, spoke of old bear claw hypnotizing him, and acted like he was from medieval times. Okay, now I want you guys to understand this is the headlong dive into schizophrenia. Okay, listen. He ripped legal mail, washed his face in the toilet, and drank toilet water. He stuck a spork into his genitals and covered himself in feces, spit, and vomit. Video from early April showed Alan frightened, extremely thin, bleeding, shaking, contorting, and interacting with non-existent stimuli or entities. He was pacing back and forth, eating his Bible, and hitting his head on the cell door violently. On a video from April 12th, he was naked while he flapped his hands and punched the air, counted imaginary objects, pulled feces from his anus and smeared it into food and marched in place. By April 13, Alan's health had become dire. The IDOC psychiatrist, Dr. Martin, another MK Ultra, saw him naked, covered in feces, with brown fluid from his mouth from eating the feces. Dr. Martin found him very psychotic, hallucinating, and incompetent to consent to treatment. On April 14th, the IDOC ordered involuntary medication and found him gravely disabled. April 14th, gravely disabled, involuntarily medicated, and a working diagnosis of MDD with psychosis. He had lost an abnormal amount of weight and was not sleeping. Haldol produced minimal improvement. He continued to speak in loose associations about things like nuclear war, schizophrenia, poisoning, schizophrenia, dying, schizophrenia, losing reality, schizophrenia, cryogenic eyeballs, schizophrenia, not remembering confessions he had already given. He also continued to play with his feces. After letting Alan sit in his feces for 2 hours on April 23rd, he was removed from his cell and given a shower. Alan's symptoms continued throughout into May. On May 3rd, MK Ultra nurse Dr. Monica Walla diagnosed Alan with a brief psychotic disorder, noting he had disorganized speech and behavior, but no delusions or hallucinations. Well, who is he talking to then? Well, hold on. If he's not having delusions or hallucinations, wait. Why is he sticking a spork in his genitals, covering himself in feces, pulling feces from his anus, frightened, bleeding, shaking, pacing back and forth, eating his Bible, banging his head on the door, flapping his hands, punching the air, counting imaginary objects, smearing feces in his food, speaking of bear claw, hypnotizing him, acting like he's from medieval times, and speaking with imaginary entities. But he's not suffering from delusions or hallucinations? On May 25th, his shot of Haldol was still not working. Remember, they're putting the Haldol on top of Prozac. For those of you who have forgotten that, they're giving the forced injections of Haldol on top of the Prozac. On May 25th, his shot was still not working. Alan paced for 2 hours and banged the back and front of his head on the metal door for about an hour. Why, if he's in safekeeping, why are the employees of the correctional facility allowing him to bang his head front and back on the metal door for about an hour if he's in protective custody, if he's in safekeeping as a pretrial detainee? Why are they allowing him to continue to injure himself during this major psychotic episode? Despite his self-injury and visible goose egg on his head, no one checked on him. The next day, Alan had 2 black eyes from banging his head, and on June 5th, 2023, IDOC administered another 30-day involuntary emergent Haldol injection. And then another injection on June 16th. On June 20th, 2023, Alan was catatonic. He was catatonic, extremely skinny. Remember, he had lost more than 40 pounds. Guards carried him to the infirmary, strapped him in a chair. After his visit, he remained vacant while staff wiped drool from his mouth. The same day, Dr. Martin claimed Alan was, listen to this, MK Ultra, coherent, oriented, not psychotic, and had been free of psychosis for 7 weeks, returning to baseline in May. This is the entire state apparatus descending upon you to coerce you into confessing to crimes you did not commit. Which leads us right into this. Alan's confessions. Alan's family. Alan confessed to his family over the phone during this very same period we just described above. On April 3rd, May 10th, May 17th, June 5th, and June 11th. On April 3rd, he told his wife, I did it. I killed Abigail Williams and Liberty German. Later saying, maybe I did it. I think I did. On May 17th, Alan insisted to his mother he killed the girls. The next day, May 18th, Alan banged his head against his cell door to the point he had a head gash. Again. On June 5th and 11th, Alan told his wife he did it, but that he has lost his mind. He is probably going to unalive himself. He feels like he is already in hell and does not understand what is happening. Again, that word, I don't understand. Guards. From April through June, guards repeatedly, allegedly, heard Alan confess, I killed Abby and Libby, amidst bizarre behavior. His statements occurred while he smeared feces, rolled in it, drank toilet water, shouted at his shadow, sang, masturbated, paced, saluted, asked nonsensical questions, hit his head, and asked if he was dead. All documented. On April 29th, Alan made a more specific statement to a guard, claiming he killed 2 girls in Delphi with a box cutter that he stole from and left in the trash at CBS. He was going to grape them, but he panicked and killed them, saying they were screaming. Just the day before, he was covered in feces. MK Ultra nurse, Dr. Monica Walla. On April 5th, Alan's emotions shifted rapidly. He questioned whether he was God, schizophrenia. On April 5th, during this period of confessions, he questioned whether he was God. He slipped the sheet under the door wanting to confess. He had intense eye contact, bizarre smiling, and circumstantial thought. Although he would go off on a tangent and sometime never return to the original topic, Dr. Walla claimed his confession was concise. Although he would go off on a tangent, sometime never returning to the original topic, Dr. Walla claimed his confession was concise. Alan said he was motivated by sex, but was uncertain whether he had sex with the girls. Alan also confessed to molesting his sister and daughter, claims which were subsequently contradicted by them. Need I remind you, something I don't see in here, he also claims he shot one of the girls. Two days later, Alan asked Dr. Walla if he had confessed. On May 2nd, Alan was very tangential, repeating himself and jumping between topics. He said, I killed Abigail Williams and Liberty German. I will kill everyone. I will wipe out the whole world after I die. He mentioned World War III, schizophrenia, and was confusing nightmares and reality. He thought he must have schizophrenia. He was randomly saying methamphetamine. What? Methamphetamine? Hold on. I gotta get a sound effect for this. He was saying methamphetamine.
Oh my God.
He was saying methamphetamine.
Bruh.
He was randomly saying methamphetamine. And telling people, including MK Ultra nurse Dr. Monica Walla, that he loved them. The day before, Walla was unable to have a meaningful conversation with him. On May 3rd, he confessed to following the girls to the bridge when the bullet fell out. And then he said down the hill. Well, let me ask you this. Where is that bullet? Was a bullet found, fell out under the high bridge? See, something ain't adding up. He was going to grape them, but saw a van. He crossed the creek, slit their throats, and covered their bodies with tree branches. He also feared missing Easter, thought his interactions with Dr. Walla were fake, and was paranoid about his safety. Doesn't this entire paragraph that let me pinch it. Okay, let me pinch. See this entire paragraph here that's not highlighted? That entirely seems fabricated by Dr. Walla. That entire paragraph here that's not highlighted seems completely fabricated by Dr. Walla, based on things she had gleaned from the community as a longtime addict of Delphi True Crime Podcast. Of course, after entering a summary into Alan's record, wouldn't you know it? Aw, shucks, Dr. Walla destroyed her notes. On May 10th, with Dr. Walla present, Alan told his wife, I did this. I killed Abigail Williams and Liberty German, while also insisting he was losing his mind. He continued believing he was dead and that the world would blow up if he fell asleep. Schizophrenia. That the water was poisoned and that he was reliving the same day over and over, Groundhog Day, which in essence he was. Dr. Walla listened to podcasts about Alan 3 hours a day. Y'all, how many days she probably works? 5 a week? 4 or 5 a week? What's 3 times 4 or 5? 12 to 15 hours a week of Delphi podcast? As a matter of fact, I think I'm going to do something on the fly. Let me see if I can pull this rabbit out of a hat. See if I can pull this out of a hat. Just a moment. You guys know what I'm going for. Just give me a moment. This would explain it better than anything I can do. Okay. Those of you new to the channel, just please understand we're all about receipts here. This is why I show you everything. I don't want you to believe anything. I want to show you what concerns me, and you draw your own conclusions. Okay. Let's see. Come on, Prof. What's going on here? I'll show you 2. Okay, let's start with this one. Just wondering who everyone watches on YouTube. I'm not here to argue. We all like different people. Personally, I prefer channels that don't just follow the narrative and do their own research. Do I agree with everything they say? No, but I respect their opinions. The channels I don't watch are the ones that yell and call people names because they don't agree with them or question them. They have egos that can't allow them to be wrong. So, who do you watch? Monica Walla. And this is verified. This is the Monica Walla. Gray Hughes. Delphi After Dark for the drama. True Crime Investigates. criminality, defense diaries, sleuth intuition. His calm tone is unnerving. Furthermore, not only was she an obsessed listener of Delphi True Crime Podcast, but check this one out. It gets worse. Because when you understand the depths of what we're dealing with here, you will start to understand that there's no way this man should have been under this woman's medical care. Check this out. A member of almost every single Delphi Facebook group okay? So Dr. Walla's listening to podcast about Alan 3 hours a day while commuting to and from work, and is simultaneously a member of almost every Delphi Facebook group. And how much you want to bet she was on Reddit too? Before Allen was arrested, in fact, she researched the suspect on IDOC's database, and after she treated Allen, she posted on social media about his case. Furthermore, what the jury heard, Bridge Guy. The jury saw the video of Bridge Guy on Liberty's phone. They also heard from 2 of the 4 girls, Blair and Carba. After seeing the video, the witnesses believed they saw Bridge Guy on February 13, 2017, but oddly enough, they could not and would not point him out in court or acknowledge that he was the one they attempted to portray in their sketches. Blair thought that she saw him on the platform on the bridge. She described the man as white, possibly in his 20s or 30s, with brown, poofy hair and a youthful, boyish appearance. She also believes she saw Abby and William approaching. Notice what I circled here or highlighted, believes. Okay, so it's key point with Betsy Blair, because remember, we have no proof of life. She believes she saw Abigail Williams and Liberty German, because we know that no one truly saw Abigail Williams and Liberty German out there. There's never been anyone come forward with proof that they saw Abby and Libby out there. And even Betsy Blair herself did not assert that she saw Abigail and Liberty out there. She intimated that she thought she could have seen Abby and Libby out there. So she saw 2 girls who she believes may have been Abby and Libby. Skipping ahead a bit, the prosecutor argued that the jury should believe Allen's confessions despite his psychosis, relying on the opinions of MK Ultra nurse Dr. Monica Walla, the Odinist guards at Westville, and Trooper Brian Harshman, who reviewed Allen's video and calls, and in his non-expert opinion, was allowed as a representative of law enforcement to give an expert opinion that it's definitely Allen's voice on the Bridge Guy video. But relying upon the opinions of this MK nurse, the Odinist guards, and the non-voice analysis expert, state expert on voice analysis, the prosecutor claimed that Allen's confessions were logical and organized and the product of free will and his newly found religion. Almost every guard testified that Allen's bizarre behavior was orchestrated and not the product of mental illness. Okay, so this is the state apparatus I was describing. Get it? The prosecutor argued that the jury should hear those confessions despite psychosis, and says that he's logical and organized and the product of free will and religion, and he's not in the midst of mental illness. The guards are saying, well, he's acting, he's orchestrated, and he's not really the product of mental illness. And one guard claiming that Allen was truthful in his confessions because of the look in his eye. Other guards saying that inmates commonly smear or eat feces as a tool for attention. None are mental health professionals and even know Allen's mental health code. Okay, but this is the state apparatus coming together to push this in this direction. Every level, at every level. Each time Allen confessed to Dr. Wallace, she said he was not delusional. Oh, just happens to be. Because he's coming at this moment and giving these words, I guess at this moment, he's not delusional, hallucinating, or psychotic. Although Allen expressed confusion and memory gaps and signs of schizophrenic ideation, all this other stuff we just read in the past 20 minutes, she suspected he was feigning and acting bizarrely, just like the Odinist guard. See, that his behavior was orchestrated and not mental illness. She suspected he's feigning and acting bizarre. On cross, she admitted she may have been wrong and Allen might have been genuine. And with hindsight, she was on the fence. Now, let's move on. There's more there. You know, if you want to look at this, you're free to go look at this yourself. I'm trying to move through this expeditiously, only focusing on the absolute most concerning points so that your time is well spent in this. Now we're going to show you some of the crime scene. Now, this is an illustration, okay, unfortunately, because this judge has decided, with the prosecutor acting on behalf of the family, to keep the crime scene away from public view. But I implore you, if you truly are concerned with this crime and you want to know what actually happened and how those girls were actually left, you want to see something that echoes this shack behind me, this shack. If you want to see something like the shack, go look up, seek out those crime scene photos, and you will find them. Because this does not do it justice. But we're going to move into some opinions of the crime scene. First of all, I'd like you to notice the sticks arranged over the puddle of blood, which they claim were placed there to hide the blood. I'd like to draw your attention to the sticks over the body of Abigail Williams, who is posed. Notice the sticks do not cover her body at all, although that's the excuse they use for that. And notice the sticks in the tree branch placed on Libby German to both hold her arm in that upright position or posture as part of her staging. And notice the sticks formed into a bind rune-like configuration, which also do not cover her body. The sticks were deliberately arranged, covering no more than a total 3% of their bodies, even according to the state's expert on the sticks. It would have taken up to 20 minutes for Abigail Williams to die. Although Liberty's injuries were more significant, it would have taken her between 5 and 10 minutes to expire. However, Prof has reason to believe that she was injured on 2 separate occasions, hours apart. Okay, so her primary injuries did not cause her death. I believe her secondary injuries caused her death within 5 minutes. The blood pattern on Abigail Williams' hands was noteworthy. When injured, people instinctively reach for major wounds every single time, getting blood on their hands and sleeves. Liberty German had substantial blood on her hands, but Abigail Williams had little to no blood on her hands or sleeves. The state's blood spatter expert had never seen, this is the state's expert, had never seen clean hands and sleeves in a case involving this amount of blood loss and a neck injury. Furthermore, about the crime scene. Despite testing the sexual assault kit, hundreds of clippings from the clothing and swabs from the girls' bodies, cartridge, and cell phone Law enforcement found no DNA from Allen, zero. Now listen, despite sexual assault kit, hundreds of clippings from the clothing, swabs from the girls' bodies, all over their bodies, swabs from the cartridge, and from the victim's cell phone, law enforcement found zero DNA from Allen, but they did find DNA. However, that's a mystery. The state's witnesses repeatedly claimed Allen used the sticks as camouflage. Not only did the state's witnesses do so, the state's spokespeople out here on the internet did the same. You should remember a number of podcasts or live streams in which multiple individuals emanating from the troll farm repeatedly made the assertion that the sticks were there to hide the bodies. For reasons the state could not explain, they claim Allen dressed Abby in Libby's clothes and turned and repositioned her at the scene, causing the blood to flow from her neck and her chin. Although the girl's injuries were different and possibly caused by multiple weapons or different mechanisms altogether, or what I say at different times altogether, the state's pathologist speculated that a single blade, such as a box cutter, caused all the injuries, including the scallop mark. But be aware that he only said that after his meetings with McClellan and after the learning that Ron Logan had told Reese Davis that a box cutter was used. So suddenly, once a box cutter came into the picture, and then that was forwarded on to investigators, and then that was forwarded on to McClellan, and then McClellan related to the state's pathologist, then suddenly the state's pathologist came up with the term box cutter. Of course, we're all just crazy here. The blood stain on the tree, according to the state, was an inverted L, transferred from Liberty German's arm as she propped herself against the tree. We're going to pause here. Let's see. So let's take a look at this. Now, I'd like you to notice the distinct right angles. Okay? Notice the distinct right angles in this marking that is in the blood of Liberty German. Notice the distinct right angles. They're unmistakable. Do you honestly believe if you had blood on your arm and you leaned on a tree that this would happen? Do you believe that if you had blood on your hand and if you propped yourself up on a tree that this would happen? Furthermore, I'd like to share something with you. Let's see. Here's a clearer image. Do you see the distinct right angle? Okay. Now I need to give you a fair warning. Some of you out there, there are some out there who you might consider friends. You need to be very careful of what you listen to and what you believe. Case in point. This right here does not sit right with me. There's no way in the world. See, this is a current effort to steer you in the wrong direction. So if you go and look, there's this post that is animated, which transforms with a swipe from this to this, okay? This to this. Okay? Absolutely no way. Do not be misled, because this is projection. You do not need this in your mind causing you to have pareidolia about what you're seeing here, because what you're seeing there is not what you're seeing here. Okay? That is a far reach, and you need to absolutely have very penetrating discernment when you're looking. Don't be led. Don't be sheep. You're not seeing this. You're seeing this. Okay? Be careful who you listen to. According to the expert on this topic, this shape, this marking, this height is all absolutely perfectly conceivable as what is to be expected in a ritualistic crime scene. Okay? So you need to ask yourself, when you're looking at this image, what are you seeing? You know you're seeing a right angle or two. You know you're seeing some drops. But do not project what someone wishes this was. Okay? Now here's another thing. Let's talk about this. This is your crime scene. It's an rendition of the crime scene. This is a somewhat accurate rendition of the crime scene. Here you can see that Liberty German is posed as the magician. She's holding a wand, which is the tree. Okay. And you can see that Abigail Williams is posed as an inverse hangman with the markings of wild woman in the shape of an antlers over her head. Same term that Elvis Fields referred to her as. And if you want to look a little deeper, here's a rendition of the actual sticks on their bodies. These are the actual sticks that were placed on their bodies. You know, the sticks that were not collected at the crime scene because they're not important. So when you look at this, you need to be seeing this, just like the shack behind me. Okay, when you see the shack behind me, made of sticks, this is what you need to be conceiving when you look at this, which is oddly familiar and similar to this. More on this later. The blood stain on the tree is an inverted L, according to the state, transferred from Liberty's arm or hand as she propped herself up against the tree in her dying moments. And the female hair, Kelsey German's, and multiple incomplete profiles were seen contamination, according to the state, or background DNA from the girl sharing clothing through incidental contact with people they knew. In other words, there was a whole bunch of DNA at the crime scene and fibers and hairs, which we're not going to look at. But realize this, there's zero, as I mentioned before, zero, zero, zero. There's no blood in Alan's car. There's no blood on Alan's clothing. There's no blood of the girls in Alan's car. There's no blood of Alan in the car. There's no blood in of Allen at the scene. Okay. There's no fibers of Allen at the scene. There's no DNA of Allen at the scene. There's absolutely nothing of Allen at the scene, but there's a whole bunch of quote unquote crime scene contamination at the scene. According to the state, it could not find Allen's DNA because blood from Abby and Libby was overwhelming the scene and competing with DNA he left behind. You know? What the jury did not hear. And remember, this is only a portion of what the jury did not hear. A portion, because there's so much that did not make its way. And we'll be talking about that when we have in the past. Bridge guy. The jury never saw the sketch below, which is the man Blair saw on the bridge when Abby and Libby were allegedly approaching. The sketch does not look like Allen at all, who in February 2016 was short, 44 years old, with closely cropped hair. Looked nothing like this. Blair rated the sketch a 10 out of 10 for accuracy. And in 2019, she reaffirmed her confidence in the sketch, rating it a 9 out of 10, insisting that she could identify Bridge Guy if she saw him again. So why didn't she at trial? Nor did the jury hear that Bledge and at one point ISP believed the man she saw was not the same man Sarah Carbaugh saw, muddy and bloody. Remember, we showed you that at the beginning of the program. They said they are not the same person. Okay. The bullet. The jury never heard that firearm and two mark evidence is flawed. The jury never heard Allen's alternative exculpatory explanation of the scene. The jury never heard that from the beginning, many investigators believed and investigated the girls' murders as part of a Norse pagan ritual, and that the usual and unusual and complex scene had textbook features. Listen, you don't understand that Dr. Perlmutter's conclusion is that this was textbook. It is textbook. Textbook crime scene in every possible way. It's in the round. It's in the woods. It's near flowing water that happens to be named Deer Creek, who is a sacrificial animal. The bodies are staged in tarot-aligned postures. There are sigils placed on their bodies. The method of death being that of a bladed weapon across the throat. Multiple elements, and on and on and on. Textbook ritualistic crime scene. In fact, there was always a discussion among law enforcement that this may be a ritual murder and that the sticks were Nordic runes. Many officers believed the scene was too complex for just one person to be involved. Within the first week, Carroll County Sheriff enlisted the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit to evaluate whether the sticks related to pagan rituals. After examination of the evidence, the BAU declined to exclude pagan ritual as a plausible explanation for the murder scene, quoting, "It remains possible a new believer or rogue believer or some offshoot of Odinism was involved in this case." I call it witchy poo. A cult. Doesn't matter what you call it. Odinist, Wiccan, witchy, cult, satanic, Esoteric. A Purdue professor also consulted law enforcement on whether the sticks were runically inspired. He found it, quote, quite plausible that these markings constitute an inscription inspired by Norse runes or a modern recreation thereof. Like I said, some offshoot. Law enforcement consulted with an undercover ISP trooper regarding the sticks and the blood stain on the tree. The officer was familiar with Norse pagan symbols through his covert intelligence. He agreed the blood on the tree resembled the pagan Fehu rune, and he found similarities between the stick formations on the girls and pagan bind runes. Once again, let's wake the F up. Once Allen was charged with the murders, the defense team consulted the nationally recognized expert, Dr. Dawn Perlmutter, who found 7 features of a Norse pagan ritual. They include location. She explained that Norse pagan followers follow a Norse pantheon of gods like Thor and Odin. They have a nature-based ideology where events and rituals are conducted outdoors, in wooded areas, near water bodies. This murder occurred outdoors in a clearing, actually in the round, and near a creek. The date. Norse pagan rituals often occur on Norse holidays or events. The Nordic holiday, Valisblot, which honors Odin's son Vali, begins at sundown on February 13th, the very moment these girls were killed, and continues until February 14th, sun up, I want to say, or maybe sundown. Valisblot, the date, 12/13. Location, the date, the means. Ritual killings often involve the use of a knife or bladed weapon or ceremonial knife. Here, the girls were killed with a knife that made an unusual scalloped mark, which I believe is a ceremonial knife. I think that weapon has still not been discovered, that it's a ceremonial knife that's being worshipped and preserved by these maniacs. I guarantee you that knife is in someone's possession and being used as a ritual item to this day. Sticks. Ritualistic crimes usually involve symbolism at the scene, and with Norse pagans, the symbolism would include arranging natural objects in a specific way, like sticks and runes, and blooding the runes. These practices are integral to magical thinking involved in Norse pagan rituals, and this entire crime scene reeks of magical thinking. Again, just to put it in your face, because it cannot be emphasized enough. Here, the stick arrangements showed intentional symbolism. It's difficult to explain the sticks as hiding the bodies. They're absolutely not working that way. They're not functioning that way. The stick arrangements on Abbey mirrored the Norse rune Gabo, and intentionally placed stick formations on Liberty look like a Nordic bind rune. Manner of death. Ritualistic sacrifices often involve blood loss and torture. We see signs of that in these bodies. There's significant blood loss from both girls, and we have reason to believe there was torture. The girls' throats were cut, and they suffered a prolonged blood loss, which is indicative of sacrificial offerings or initiation type of activities, which is exactly what Elvis Fields described, who is oddly missing from this document. Body arrangement. In rituals, the sacrifice will be displayed or arranged at the scene. I call it a tableau. in a manner that is significant to the group. And an upside down hanging body is an important element of Norse paganism because Odin hung from a tree for 9 days before discovering runes. Like Abby Williams' positioning, the classic image of Odin depicts him with one leg bent behind the other, which I say is an inversion of the hanged man. Unusual blood pattern. Finally, a ritualistic sacrifice would involve an atypical or symbolic blood pattern. And here the blood pattern on the F tree appeared to look like a Norse pagan rune. The manner, okay, that covers the crime scene. We're moving on. The manner and thoroughness and quality investigation. Point number 6. The jury never heard how law enforcement bungled the investigation into the ritual killing or suspects connected to Norse paganism or some cult. ISP disregarded Brad Holder, the father of Abby Williams' boyfriend and Holder's friend Patrick Westfall, as promising alternative suspects because they lost evidence. They lost evidence. Law enforcement lost evidence. They mishandled interviews. They deleted interviews, and they conducted a poor investigation. Investigation into the ritualistic killing. After examining the scene, several officers believed the scene was too complex for just one person to be involved. Not a lone wolf. When the BAU evaluated the scene, they found it noteworthy that Abby was clothed. Allowing Abby to dress ahead of time suggests that the suspect or suspects felt differently towards her, including a possibly heightened level of guilt or regret, at least compared to Liberty German, who was a sacrificial lamb. Law enforcement explored a group of pagans connected to Abby Williams. As a matter of fact, in the weeks leading to the murders, Abby Williams had been talking with a boy, Logan Holder, and meeting up with him a few times. In the weeks leading up to the murders, Abby had been meeting with and talking with Logan Holder. She kept this relationship secret from her family. On the day she was murdered, Abby Williams invited Logan Holder to meet her on the trails, just like Libby invited Anthony Schatz to meet her on the trails. Isn't it odd that both of these girls invited boys to meet them on the trails? Was this intended to be a double date? Food for thought. Logan Holder had school, so he declined. While law enforcement was searching for the girls on February 14th, they learned about Logan Holder and Abby Williams' secret relationship. They pulled Logan Holder out of class in Logansport and searched his phone. That moment, Logan texted his father, Brad Holder, "She's missing." She's missing. I'd like you to take note of the Tipton Lodge, number 33. March 18th of 2017. Congratulations to Levi Holder, receiving the sublime degree of Master Mason. Senior Steward, Brad Holder. Tipton Lodge, number 33. Free and accepted Masons, Logansport with Brad Holder and 3 others. Congratulations to brother Nick McClellan, November 23rd, 2018, a member of Mount Zion Lodge 211 Camden, for receiving his Master Mason degree this evening in Tipton Lodge number 33. Pin the tail on the YouTuber. Can anybody do it? Where's the YouTuber in this pic? Where's the prosecutor in this pic? Where's the YouTuber in this pic? you guys understand the bonds of Masonic Brotherhood? Do you not find it odd that in this very time period, we have all of these individuals all connected to Tipton Lodge number 33, including the prosecutor on this case, who happens to be related to the family of one of the victims, which is total side point. Lost and missing interviews. On February 17, 2017, law enforcement interviewed both Logan Holder and Brad Holder. By then, law enforcement already suspected the murder scene involved a pagan ritual. During the interview, Holder reported being involved in a pagan tribe cult and spending every weekend in Delphi engaging in pagan rituals with Patrick Westfall, and 5 or 6 others, including women. Remember, we have female hair and DNA at the crime scene. These rituals involved animal sacrifice and human bloodletting. Hello. These rituals involved animal sacrifice. These rituals every weekend in Delphi with 5 or 6 others included animal sacrifice and human bloodletting. Holder admitted knowing that Abby and Logan were in a relationship, but denied ever meeting her, although we now know that's not true. Law enforcement recorded Holder's interview, but the Delphi PD recorded over it their only copy before August 2017, permanently deleting it. Only a 1-page narrative remains. According to the narrative, Holder told police he owned a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson. Think back to what I told you about Indiana State Police in the early days. What did I say they were looking for in regard to a .40 caliber handgun? I said to you that law enforcement was looking for 2 types of .40 caliber handgun that may had made the marks on that round. And I said to you that one of those was a Sig Sauer .40 caliber handgun. And I said to you the other was a Smith & Wesson. Law enforcement itself had deemed that either a Smith & Wesson or a Sig Sauer .40 caliber had dropped that round. And according to that narrative, Holder told police he owned a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson. But law enforcement never collected it, nor did they collect his cell phone. On February 19th, 2017, law enforcement interviewed Patrick Westfall. They failed to record this interview. Only a 5-paragraph narrative remained. According to that narrative, Westfall knew the woods where the girls were murdered very well. He reported knowing the girls, but denied ever meeting them, which we also know is false. He also reported being a religious leader for local pagans, just like Brad Holder, oddly enough. And he wore a necklace to the interview representing his efforts to pledge the Venlanders. The Venlanders, a pagan social club. There's no indication law enforcement even asked whether he owned a .40 caliber firearm. And Westfall's phone was not searched at the time. Alibi investigation. When asked for an alibi, Westfall claimed he was home with his minor son. And Holder told officers he was at work with Liberty Landfill. Oddly enough, Liberty, right? On April 13th, oddly enough, officers visited the landfill, Liberty, to investigate and spoke with an employee, Susan Case, who provided a printout showing Holder swiped out of work at 2:45 p.m. However, which was 30 minutes after the Bridge Guy video. Susan Case, odd name, invited the officers to review the video to confirm the printout's accuracy, but they declined. Nor did they interview any other employers or employees. Now, give me a moment, please. I need to cough. Okay, thank you. Summary of argument. Again, like I have skipped around quite a bit in this, but I am focusing on the absolute most pertinent pieces of this and leaving all the extra out. Unconstitutional search. Like I said, this is the bedrock of this particular appeal, in my opinion. And keep in mind, this is what I have reminded you is referred to as the fruit of the poisonous tree. The trial court committed reversible error by admitting evidence seized under an unconstitutional warrant and by denying Allen a Franks hearing. Detective Liggett obtained the warrant for Allen's home only by omitting and altering witness descriptions to connect Allen to quote unquote bridge guy, and by misrepresenting that Allen admitted he wore a blue Carhartt like bridge guy. These misrepresentations and omissions misled the judge into believing multiple witnesses saw Allen and his car, when in fact they described someone else and a different car. Once the affidavit is corrected, there is no probable cause. So let's back that up. The trial court committed reversible error by admitting evidence seized under an unconstitutional search warrant and by denying a Franks hearing. Detective Liggett obtained that warrant for Allen's home only by omitting and altering witness descriptions connecting Allen to bridge guy and by misrepresenting that Allen admitted he wore a blue Carhartt like bridge guy. These misrepresentations and omissions misled the judge into believing multiple witnesses saw Allen in his car, when in fact they described someone else completely different and a vehicle completely different. Once that affidavit is corrected, meaning once you pull out all of the lies and misrepresentations and you include the omissions, there is no probable cause for the search warrant in the first place. That's the bedrock foundation of this. Okay, next layer. Unprecedented confinement, going against all Geneva Convention and all other human ethical standards around this wide world in our modern age. Allen's confessions were absolutely involuntary and the product of grave mental health disability caused by 13 months of maximum security pretrial solitary confinement, which exceeded Indiana DOC policy by 12 months, an entire year, and caused psychosis, paranoia, and confusion, while state actors were indifferent to his detention and actually using it to extract what they wanted. Admission of these statements violated both federal due process and Indiana's protections against unnecessary rigor. And the error was not harmless, requiring suppression. So listen to this. This is very, very important for the next layer if this happens to go to federal level. Admission of these confessions or these statements made while in this condition violate both federal due process and Indiana protection against unnecessary rigor, and the error was not harmless, requiring suppression. Unfair trial. The trial court denied Allen his constitutional right to a fair trial through a series, notice the language is very perfect, arbitrary and prejudicial rulings that crippled his ability to present a complete defense. The trial court excluded critical exculpatory evidence including Blair's sketch, which directly undermined the state's eyewitness theory and timeline and barred expert testimony challenging the reliability of the state's forensic methodology. It permitted inadmissible hearsay to rehabilitate the prosecutor's timeline. That's right. This is bias. This is what we call bias, judicial bias, which was clearly exhibited. They're going to have a difficult time with this. Arbitrary and prejudicial rulings and bias, crippling the ability to present defense, excluding critical exculpatory evidence, all in an effort to railroad this man, and barring the expert testimony challenging the reliability of the forensic methodology, permitting hearsay evidence to quote unquote evidence to rehabilitate the prosecution's timeline, blocking Allen from presenting evidence that showed the circumstances that led to his confession. Okay, so these circumstances that we just referenced at Westville that led to these confessions, they barred him from presenting the evidence that showed that these circumstances that would have led to these confessions that should have made them inadmissible in the first place and impeached their credibility, including audio depicting his deteriorated mental state. Remember, they picked and chose. They didn't allow him to relay that he was in this deep psychosis at the time all this was occurring and these statements were coming. The court further prevented Allen from introducing substantial evidence of third-party guilt. This is what we've called third-party suspects. By preventing him from introducing substantial evidence of third-party guilt and an incomplete investigation, deprived the jury of context necessary to assess reasonable doubt. Collectively, these errors violated Allen's 14th and 6th Amendments, okay, or his rights, and create a fundamentally one-sided proceeding. In other words, an unfair trial, a biased proceeding by a biased judge and a bloodthirsty prosecutor and a bunch of bloodthirsty witnesses and lying state actors. A new trial is constitutionally required to restore the integrity of this adversarial process. So do you see what I mean? You cannot railroad a man to this degree, as I mentioned prior, using the entire state apparatus to do this. You can't do this to this degree and it be allowed to stand. There's no integrity in this process. Okay. Argument. The trial court committed reversible error by admitting evidence seized from the unconstitutional search of Allen's home and denying a Frank's hearing. When reviewing the admission of evidence after denial of a motion to suppress, the court considers evidence favorable to the ruling and contradicted evidence to the contrary. Factual findings are reviewed for clear error, but the constitutionality of a search is reviewed de novo. Allen filed a motion to suppress, a motion for Frank's hearing, amended request, and lengthy memorandum with exhibits, which we call the 136 pages. The trial court denied the motion and the hearing, concluding Liggett's affidavit did not include false statements or omit facts with reckless disregard or intent to mislead. The trial court erred by concluding that Detective Liggett did not make false statements or reckless omissions in his affidavit. Both the state and U.S. constitutions guarantee that no warrant shall be issued but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation. The state must include all material facts in a warrant application, including facts that cast doubt on the existence of probable cause. This is the problem here. And the source's responsibility, or a source's responsibility. A warrant is invalid if, one, the police omitted facts with the intent to make the affidavit misleading. Now listen, this is case law, and this is exactly what we've just laid out has happened. And we've been saying it for 2 years or 3. A warrant is invalid if the police make or omitted facts with the intent to make the affidavit misleading with reckless disregard for whether it would be misleading. Okay. Number 2, the affidavit supplemented with the omitted information. Like I said, if you take out the bad info and then you put in the omitted info would have been The affidavit supplemented with omitted info would have been insufficient to finding probable cause. The defendant must prove a reckless or deliberate false statement by a preponderance. An officer omits evidence with reckless disregard if, now this is the important part I've highlighted, the officer withholds a fact in his kern that any reasonable person would have known that the judge would wish to know. In other words, the judge should have known this. It needed to be in the document in order for the judge to not be able to claim plausible deniability. Because understand the rationale for this. In my mind, without this being laid out properly in a probable cause affidavit, then the judge can claim that they didn't have a good understanding of the facts, or they didn't know the facts, so that then when they apply their signature, right, and allow this search warrant to happen, they don't bear the responsibility. Therefore, it's imperative that the probable cause affidavits be complete and without omission and without misrepresentation of the facts, so that the judge could have all the information that any reasonable person or any judge would wish to know, to be confident to adhere their signature to the document, making them liable for it. So this is the point of the legislation on this, and this is exactly the abuses that we've witnessed. Now, example includes facts undermining the type of drug seized or an informant's reliability. These are very low bars. And if you apply this entire appellate brief here, you're seeing that they're hitting a very high bar, okay? They're hitting a very high bar with this, because when you look at all the case precedents, or whatever you want to call it, all the precedent that's being relied upon or referenced here, they're all pretty much lower bars than we're seeing with this, which tells us that if the precedent are these low bar type of findings or conclusions, then this being even a higher level of abuse should surpass that low bar, right? So in other words, if omissions of evidence include types of things like undermining the type of drug seized or an informant's reliability, then things should be reversed. Well, shouldn't the same happen with Rick Allen's probable cause affidavit, which is much more concerning? This includes details undermining an officer's conclusion. Similar thing. Listen to this precedent, where a marijuana field officer described as near a defendant's house was actually 2 to 6 miles away. So you see what I mean about this low bar with these precedents? These are not big deals. They're somewhat of a big deal, but if you think of what happened in this DELPHI case, or in this probable cause leading up to this with Richard Allen, it's so far beyond these little, minor. These are more minor type of I guess parallels. If we're going to try to make them a parallel, this is a way less concerning parallel. They're still concerning. Anyhow, let's continue. Okay, this says, I'm sorry. Another example, a detective misled the court by incorrectly reporting a witness's description of a suspect. Doesn't that sound familiar? Detective misled the court in USA v. Hernandez by incorrectly reporting a witness's description of a suspect. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Sounds exactly like Tony Liggett and Sarah Carball, Betsy Blair, right? All right. Detective Liggett omitted and changed key information that undermined his conclusion Allen was bridge guy. Liggett misled the court in 4 ways. First, Detective Liggett misled the court to believe Blair's description of the man on the bridge matched Allen when it did not. Liggett told the court that Blair said the man was standing on the platform and wearing a blue jacket and jeans. But Liggett omitted the rest of Blair's description that did not match Allen. The man had brown, poofy hair like the sketch below and was in his 20s or early 30s, youthful and medium build. Second, Liggett misled the court that Allen's car was parked at the old CPS lot during the time of the kidnappings. Detective Liggett told the court that after Blair saw the man on the bridge, she saw two girls she thought, remember I keep highlighting that, she thought or she believed were Abby and Libby on the trail approaching the bridge. Blair saw the man on the bridge, said she saw two girls she thought were Abby and Libby. Liggett told the court that Allen parked his black Ford Focus, his black 2016 Ford Focus at the old CPS building, but omitted that Blair said the car she saw during the time frame of the kidnapping was not black. Wait a minute. So Blair says the car was not black and had sharp angles like in the sketch below. Considering the omitted information, Blair excluded Allen's black hatchback. Again, not black, black. Sharp angles, round angles, or rounded. Considering this information, Betsy Blair excluded Allen's black hatchback. And remember, her description, as I mentioned before, was this. Let's take a look at it for a moment. This is what she described. Right? This is what she described. This is a material omission. USA or US v. Wells, invalid warrant where officer changed witness's car description in drive-by shooting. Again, another precedent. Changing the witness's car description in a drive-by shooting. Sounds familiar. Thirdly, Liggett misled the court that the man walking on 300 North was Bridge Guy. Liggett falsely told the court that Carbaugh in 2017 claimed the man was muddy and bloody wearing a blue jacket when she actually said his jacket was tan and he was muddy. A bloody man in a blue jacket matches Bridge Guy. A muddy man in a tan jacket does not. Liggett also admitted that Blair told him that the man she saw on the bridge was not the same person Carbaugh described. Again, Liggett omitted that Betsy Blair told him the man she saw on the bridge was not the same person Carbaugh described. ISP even released a public statement that the men are not the same person. Fourthly, Liggett connected Allen to Bridge Guy by falsely claiming Allen admitted wearing a black or blue Carhartt and a head covering. But Allen told investigators he didn't know what he was wearing. Although Liggett used Allen's wife's statement that Allen currently owned a blue Carhartt as a nexus to his home, Liggett omitted that she said he purchased his coat a couple years ago. The girls were killed in 2017. Had the court known Allen simply admitted owning a blue or black Carhartt or coat, as does probably every 50-year-old man, the court would have known that there's no connection between him and Bridge Guy. Again, this is all plausible deniability stuff because, look, Gold knew about all of this. Let's be honest here. Let's be real. Let's be real here. Gold knew about all of this. She greenlit it, signed off on it, and was down for the fight, right? Detective Liggett's omissions and false statements recklessly misled the judge. Again, this is giving the judge an out. No, the judge knew it was that. You mean recklessly misled Diener, who subsequently bailed, citing YouTubers and the public bloodlust? After fraudulently signing a document that he himself had authored for Tobe Lesenby? Yeah, you remember that? Any reasonable person would have known the judge would wish to know that Betsy Blair's description of Bridge Guy in the car at CPS did not match Allen or his car. Any reasonable person would have known, uh, the judge would wish to know that in 2017, Sarah Carbaugh described the man walking down the road as only muddy, wearing a tan jacket, not a blue jacket like Bridge Guy. Any reasonable person would have known that the judge would have wished to know that Blair did not believe she saw the same man as Carbaugh. Any reasonable person would have known that the judge would have wanted to know that Allen never said he wore a blue Carhartt head covering, and he bought his blue Carhartt a couple years before 2022. The omitted and false information strikes at the heart of Liggett's conclusion that Allen was the man on Liberty German's phone. Like I said, we said this from the very beginning. When we first delved deep into that probable cause affidavit, we said all of this back then, and you can go and see for yourself. It was obvious that he was twisting, bending, omitting, flipping. He was doing somersaults to try to piece this together and stack the deck against Richard Allen and get this probable cause affidavit to go search. And maybe it'll come back to bite him in the ass. The state's probable cause relies on a tight timeline, making Allen the man the four girls saw on the trail, Blair saw on the bridge, and Carbaugh saw on the road. And any judge would want to know if witnesses described someone other than Allen, other than his car, or Bridge Guy. Any judge should have wanted to know and would want to know if the witnesses described someone other than Allen. So when you take all of these different descriptions, remember you had someone in blue, someone in black, someone tall and muscular, someone young and slender. You had all these different descriptions of people, and you had all these different descriptions of vehicles. You had a smart car, you had a purple PT Cruiser, you had a 1965 Comet, you had all these various vehicles described, all these various peoples described in this time frame. Should not that all have been laid out for the judge? Because any of those other persons described could have been the actual killer or one of the actual killers of Abby and Libby. When you take all of that and bend it and twist it like putty and to form it into a shape of Richard Allen, you have suddenly excluded all of these other potential perpetrators or witnesses. Moreover, the fact that Liggett lied twice in the affidavit about the connection between Allen and Bridge Guy, i.e. the blue jacket, shows more than reckless disregard for the truth. These falsehoods were directed at connecting Allen to Liberty German's video, which would otherwise include any other white male. So you see what I mean? This was targeted. With the omitted and inaccurate evidence, the affidavit was insufficient to establish probable cause. Probable cause exists when there's sufficient evidence to cause a reasonably prudent person to believe a search will uncover evidence of a crime. A reasonably prudent person would not believe Allen was connected to the murders or that evidence would be found in his home. The state is left with Dan Doolin's report claiming Allen told him he was on a trail between 1:30 and 3:30 and saw three girls, not four, like those who thought they saw Bridge Guy. During his October 13th, 22, there's that number again, 13. During his October 13th, 2022 interview, Allen admitted wearing blue jeans and owning a gun, knives, and a blue or black jacket and walking out to the first platform of the bridge to watch fish. But Allen does not look anything like the person Blair saw on the bridge. Also, his car is a different color and a different shape and a different vintage than that oddly parked car. And the man Sarah Carbaugh saw walking was most likely not even Bridge Guy. Remember, a tan guy that was muddy, a guy in a tan jacket that was muddy. If Allen being on the trail within the same 2 hours the girl were abducted is enough for a warrant, law enforcement would have obtained one for Allen's home in 2017 and probably could have obtained a warrant for about 15 other individuals in Delphi. Remember, that place was aflood with activity before this time frame around where they say the girls got abducted or dropped off. And the place was a flood of activity after. So this entire vacuum of space between the 1:30, 2:30 time period when no one wants to be there, or between the 2 and 3 hour, the 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock hour. I always call that's the no-go zone, right? Between that 2 o'clock and 2:45, that's the no-go zone. No one wants to be out there. But you take all those hours before and then all those hours after, and the place is just it's busy. It's alight with people, right? There's people all over before that day and all over after, but no one's there at the goddamn time that this shit really happens according to the state's timeline. No one wants to be there. So if Alan being on the trail within a 2 or 3 hour period establishes probable cause, then what happens to all these other 15 people? The error requires reversal. Number 4. The state's entire case is built on Liggett's half-truths and falsehoods, and Gray Hugh's narrative, by the way. Without the gun seized in the search, there's no opinion from Oberg on which the state arrested Allen. And without the arrest, there are no confessions, there's no abuse, there's no confinement, there's no torture, there's no forced medication. If the warrant was illegal, the state has no case. Even if the court finds the confession was not a product of solitary, Allen is still entitled to a new trial. Before a constitutional error can be held harmless, the court must, it's like shall, find it was harmless beyond a reasonable doubt. In other words, the bar is beyond a reasonable doubt that it be harmless. Without the fruits of the search, the gun, the casing in the Hope box, the Carhartt, the knives, the computer, the state cannot prove the jury would have convicted. In other words, without the fruits of the poisonous tree, you get a not guilty verdict. As a matter of fact, you don't even get a trial or an arrest. At a minimum, Allen is entitled to remand for a Franks hearing. Even if Allen's exhibits to the Franks motion do not prove by a preponderance that Liggett deliberately or recklessly falsified or omitted material information, they entitled him to a Franks hearing. A defendant who makes... Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I left that page out. But that must have been my final conclusion there was he was entitled to a Franks hearing, period. Okay, since these people like saying period when they're trying to convince you, these cranks love to say, oh, blah, 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 lie, period. Lie, period. So I'll say it this way. Back to this page. He was entitled to a Franks hearing, period. Page 66, y'all. Okay. The trial court erred by admitting statements Allen made while gravely disabled during an unprecedented pretrial solitary confinement in a maximum security prison. Solitary confinement is a form of punishment, and depending on its conditions, even torture. By 2023, when Allen was held in solitary for 13 months, it was well established that prolonged isolation causes psychological pain, suicidal ideation, and psychosis. To protect inmates from psychological harm, the IDOC strictly prohibits solitary confinement over 30 days for anyone with serious mental illness and requires transfer if serious mental illness symptoms appear. So why was he not transferred? When Allen exhibited the predictable symptoms of psychological pain, confusion, and psychosis, IDOC administrators refused to transfer him to a mental health unit. Remember at the time, like in real time, we were begging. We were on here, on the internet, on YouTube, we were pleading and begging that he be moved to mental health care facility. When we saw that photo, you guys remember that photo? I know I better have it. Hold on. If I ain't got this photo ready, I'm going to kick myself. I guess I have to kick myself because I thought I had that photo already. Let me pull that up. This is very important to make this point. Okay, let's see. See if I'll be able to pull a rabbit out of the hat again. Let's see. No, maybe not. I had this ready to go. Yeah, but I didn't tell you the stream crashed on me right before I came on. And so I lost everything I had preloaded. I had to do it on the fly. Let's see. We'll do this on the fly. Okay. May or may not happen. But what I'm looking for, you guys have all seen the photo of Rick Allen. As a matter of fact, I know that I have it. I wonder if I have this Frank's memorandum here. Let's see. No, I don't. I'll skip it. But you recall the photo of Rick Allen. When Allen's attorneys informed the court of his dire condition, this is what I was trying to show you, the photo of him looking horrible that those attorneys took and filed with the Franks memo. The court refused to move him, and the prosecutor delayed and mocked the counsel's concerns while collecting evidence of Allen's confessions. Let's read that again. IDOC administrators refused to transfer him to a mental health unit. When Allen's attorneys informed the court of his dire condition, the court also refused to move him, and the prosecutor delayed and mocked counsel's concerns while collecting evidence of his confessions. The question for this court is unprecedented but simple. Should the state be able to benefit from Allen's psychological pain and torture that their deliberate indifference, and I would dare to say collusion, to the detriment of his mental health in order to coerce him into a plea deal and extract confessions, should that deliberate collusion, should the state be able to benefit from it? Standard of review and additional facts. Allen moved to suppress his statements made while in solitary confinement, which the court denied. The court reasoned that the statements were voluntary because Allen failed to show that they resulted from state psychological coercion or coercive interrogation. The court found Allen's detention was intended to protect him, and that while he suffered from major depressive disorder and anxiety, he did not have serious mental illness that would render his statements involuntary. Sounds like the judge colluding? In addition to IDOC records and videos like those admitted at trial, Allen proffered an order and settlement from Indiana Protection and Advocacy, the IDOC, that the trial court excluded from the suppression hearing as irrelevant. The trial court abused its discretion by refusing to admit the IPAS order settlement info into the suppression hearing. Evidence is relevant if it has any tendency to make a fact of consequence and determining the action of more or less probable, the action more or less probable than it would be without it. Here, the order settlement makes it more likely that Allen's psychosis was caused by his confinement. That's why she excluded it. The order found solitary confinement causes all of the symptoms that Allen experienced. Allen was more likely to decompensate because he spent 7 months on suicide watch, an even more restrictive form of this 13 months of solitary. The order settlement also makes it more likely that Allen was subjected to psychological coercion by showing solitary causes psychological pain. It demonstrates state action, the IDOC placing and keeping Allen in solitary, knowing that it was causing the predictable pain. And this is why she excluded it, because this goes to the point that this was all intentional. He was put in Guantanamo Bay to be waterboarded in order to coerce him into a plea deal. When that failed, they had to take it to court, and here we are now. The order or settlement shows how extensively the Indiana Department of Correction violated its own policy, as it includes MDD, major depressive disorder, which Allen was diagnosed with at a level D of severity in the serious mental illness definition, restricting Allen's solitary to 30 days. So do you see what is argued here? How do they not move on this? In other words, the IDOC's policy included Allen's diagnosis or condition in its definition of serious mental illness, which should have restricted it to 30 days. And furthermore, remember the previous page, they should have moved him. See? This is not this page, it's the prior. They should have moved him because of this. Where is it? I'm starting to get my vision's blurred because this has gone on for a while. There you are. You see it says, to protect inmates from psychological harm, the IDOC strictly prohibits solitary confinement for over 30 days for anyone with what? SMI, serious mental illness, and requires transfer if serious mental illness symptoms appear. And check this out, like they just said. The IDOC violated its own policy as it includes major depressive disorder in the serious mental illness definition, restricting Allen's solitary to 30 days and demanding his transfer. You see what I'm saying here? It's unbelievable. It's appalling. Allen was harmed by the court's refusal to consider the order's settlement because it undermined the court's findings and conclusions. Yes, and this was what is called railroading, bias, judicial bias. This is why she did not allow this, because she knew. Page 71 and 72 for those who care. Part C, the state failed to prove Allen's statements made while gravely disabled were voluntary. Number one, the U.S. Constitution. The state failed to prove that Allen's statements were not a product of psychological coercion. An involuntary statement obtained through state action violates due process. An involuntary statement obtained through state action violates due process and is inadmissible. Colorado v. Connolly states, a confession is voluntary if it is a product of a rational intellect and freely self-determined, rather than, what is the term? Overborne will by state law enforcement conduct. Hello. State law enforcement conduct can include psychiatric facilities and prison staff. Statements produced through coercive environment are involuntary. U.S. v. Caracas, regardless of whether solicited through police interrogation. These are all your precedents, right? When state actors use more subtle forms of psychological coercion, the defendant's mental illness is more significant in the voluntariness determination. But the state must still exploit the defendant's illness with coercive tactics. For a statement to be involuntary, state action must be causally related to the confession, and we know it is. The state's prolonged solitary confinement of Allen was a state action. Contrary to the court's finding that Allen failed to prove state psychological coercion, it was the state's burden to prove Allen's statement voluntary by a preponderance of evidence. This is the standard. To the extent Allen had a minimal burden of production, he met that. Prolonged maximum security solitary confinement of a pretrial detainee, especially after psychosis develops, is state action. Unlike the mentally ill defendant in Connolly, who walked into a police station and confessed, Allen never voluntarily came into custody. He consistently protested his innocence until enduring 5 months of maximum security solitary with no human contact except while chained or caged. Because it was pretrial, Allen's solitary was unprecedented and borderline, if not unconstitutional, punishment. Also, Allen's solitary exceeded the 30-day IDOC policy restriction. IDOC knew it could harm Allen. When IDOC observed Allen's predictable deterioration, they refused to transfer him, meaning they exacerbated it. Keeping Allen in solitary when he was in no doubt in SMI was an administrative decision. Finally, the state's conduct also involved the prosecutor, law enforcement, and the court itself. After Allen filed his April 5th emergency transfer motion citing his dire condition, the prosecutor waited 9 fucking days to respond while investigators monitored real-time calls in which Allen confessed. Keep in mind what was going on, okay? The prosecutor then mocked the defense counsel and concerns as colorful and dramatic, like he's done throughout this thing. While that same day, IDOC found Allen gravely, the state itself, the same day that McClellan was mocking the defense as being overly colorful and dramatic, that very same day, the IDOC itself determined that Allen was gravely disabled. Knowing Allen was decompensating, the court refused to transfer him, putting the onus on IDOC to provide care. It is fundamentally wrong to keep a gravely disabled Allen in solitary while using against him statements made to psychologists, MKUltra, and suicide companions, Vinlanders. Okay. The state's prolonged pretrial solitary confinement was psychological coercion. Allen's solitary was psychological coercion because it was prolonged, caused psychological pain, and put him in the mercy of the state, or at the mercy of the state. The prolonged nature is coercion because solitary confinement can bring a person to the edge of madness, perhaps to madness itself. This has been recognized in literature, law, and science. Solitary causes psychological trauma, including psychosis, hallucinations, and paranoia. Okay, sorry. I'm losing my throat now. It's been a lot. Allen's confessions were a product of solitary-induced psychosis, not rational intellect. IDOC records show that Allen continued to suffer from psychotic or psychosis during the times he confessed. On April 5th, when he confessed to Dr. Walla, he was not eating or sleeping, and he was drinking from the toilet. On May 3rd, when he confessed, Allen had symptoms of paranoia and disorientation. Despite Walla claiming he presented as more organized than he has been, the day before he was confusing nightmares with reality and claiming to have started World War III. 2 days before, he was too disjointed to hold a conversation. Days earlier, he covered himself in feces and claimed he was King Michael. His confessions to guards occurred during bizarre psychotic behavior. Guards believed he was faking, but they are not clinicians, and Dr. Westcott found no malingering through objective testing. Allen confessed to his family on April 3rd, May 10th, May 17th, May 25th, and June. So April, May, June. On April 3rd, he also fell on the floor as if he was dead and was suicidal. On May 10th, he believed he was dead, that the world would blow up if he slept. His water poisoned, and he was reliving the same day. On May 17th, he was paranoid of attorneys and staff with odom patches. Allen paced for 2 hours and banged his head. He thought he was in hell and did not understand what was happening. State action overbore Allen's will. Allen did not confess until after 5 to 7 months of solitary. Before arrest, he consistently denied involvement. Dr. Westcott opined Allen's psychosis was caused by the stress of solitary confinement on pre-existing illness. MK Ultra nurse Dr. Monica Walla agreed that a lot of the time solitary confinement exacerbates mental illness, and it's reasonable to believe Allen's confinement caused the psychosis. Number 2. Indiana Constitution. The state failed to prove Allen's statements were a product of rational intellect rather than the state's misconduct. The Indiana Constitution protects against the admission of involuntary statements. Also, it does not require state action be coercive to overcome a mentally ill person's will. State negligence that contributes to overcoming the defendant's rational intellect is what has occurred here. Here, the IDOC's refusal to apply the 30-day policy to Allen and the refusal to transfer him after he deteriorated, at a minimum, neglects state conduct that caused Allen's or at a minimum, negligent state conduct that caused Allen's psychosis and confessions. And the prosecutor's delay in the trial court's refusal to set a timely hearing exacerbated that deterioration. This is conduct that our Constitution cannot tolerate, regardless of whether it constitutes coercion under the federal due process. Also, the evidence does not show the statements were a product of rational intellect beyond a reasonable doubt. Remember, that's the bar earlier we read. Allen was considered gravely disabled through June 16th when he received his last emergency injection due to self-harm. Though Walla sometimes described Allen as more coherent or his symptoms not significant, the state cannot have it both ways. That is, Allen decompensated to the point of forced medication, but remained rational beyond a reasonable doubt? I mean, isn't that medical malpractice? Even if Allen could occasionally hold a conversation, it does not render his confession voluntary. And if you're injecting him forcibly with Haldol when he's absolutely rational and beyond a reasonable doubt, his thoughts are the product of a rational intellect, then why are you injecting him with Haldol? You can't have it both ways. It's either or. Even if the court finds Allen's statements voluntary, they are a product of unconstitutional detention. Allen's prolonged solitary confinement violated Article 1, Sections 12 and 15. Here, Allen was sent to solitary for safekeeping without even a hearing or notice. Even when his attorneys informed the court of his dire condition, the court refused to set a hearing in violation of Indiana Code Section 3533.11.2. Although the court eventually held a hearing on June 15th, 2023, by that time the damage was damn near done. Remember, it's April, May, June is when the problem is. The constitutional violations require suppression, okay? Under the exclusionary rule, to determine whether a statement is a product of an illegal detention, the court must ask if the statement, quote, has been come at by the exploitation of that illegality, or instead by means sufficiently distinguishable to be purged of the primary taint. First, Allen's statements occurred during the illegality of his detention at Westville. Secondly, there were no intervening circumstances. Again, there is a well known connection between solitary confinement and psychosis delirium. Thirdly, the constitutional violation was flagrant because IDOC violated its own policies for keeping Allen safe with this SMI, serious mental illness, and the court and prosecutor refused to help Allen when the attorneys warned of his deterioration. Allen was still gravely disabled when he confessed. As such, his free will did not purge the taint of his illegal detention. The trial court, Judge Gull, erred by denying the motion to suppress. The error was not harmless. Before a federal state constitutional error can be held harmless, the court must find it was harmless beyond a reasonable doubt. No piece of evidence may have greater sway over a jury than a defendant's confession. Here we go. The erroneous admission of statements to Dr. Walla alone was prejudicial because they were a large part of the state's case. The prosecutor particularly concentrated on Mr. Allen's May 3rd statement, arguing that Allen knew a fact only the killer would know. What else was happening on May 3rd? The court denied Allen his right to present a complete defense, to explain the scene, and to impeach the investigation. Standard of review. While this court assesses claims relating to admitting or excluding evidence for abuse of discretion, to the extent those claims implicate constitutional issues, this court reviews them de novo. The court committed reversible error by excluding Blair's sketch of Bridge Guy. This decision violated rules of evidence and denied Allen his constitutional right to present a defense of mistaken identity. Evidence is relevant when it has any tendency to make the existence of any fact that is of consequence to the determination of the action more probable or less probable than it would be without the evidence. In other words, they have shot themselves in the foot. So all of this flagrant railroading and violation and all of the obvious strong arming that we witnessed, it's all coming home to roost. Blair's sketch proves she did not see Allen on the bridge. Blair did not identify Allen in court as Bridge Guy, but according to the prosecutor, Blair must have seen Allen on the bridge because Allen told us he went out to the Monon High Bridge out on the first platform, which is exactly where Blair saw Bridge Guy. Blair's sketch shows Allen looked nothing like the person she saw. Just 3 days after the murders, Blair met with the sketch artist and described the man she saw on the bridge as white, about 20, medium build, and having brown curly hair. Blair's sketch also shows that she and Carbaugh saw different people. And the prosecutor told the jury that every eyewitness is, quote, adamant that the person they saw was Bridge Guy. There's no doubt in their minds. But Blair's sketch disproves this claim from the prosecutor to the jury. Carbaugh, like Blair, made a sketch. When Blair saw it, she described it as wrong and not who she saw. Blair's sketch impeaches the investigation and shows law enforcement bias against Allen. For 2 years, law enforcement circulated Carbaugh's sketch without it yielding a single arrest. So in April 2019, ISP releases Blair's sketch, declare, declaring it represented the face of Bridge Guy, and announced that Blair and Carbaugh did not see the same person. However, after Allen's arrest, of course, the story changed, and the jury was lied to and told that Carbaugh and Blair saw the same person, and they were lied to throughout the course of the trial. Blair's sketch was reliable and probative of Bridge Guy's identity. Blair contacted law enforcement the day the girls went missing, and it was very clear to her she saw Bridge Guy. 2 days later, she developed her sketch with an artist and a book of facial features. She rated her sketch 10 out of 10 for accuracy. She reaffirmed her confidence in 2019. She insisted that she could identify Bridge Guy if she saw him. The court committed reversible error in excluding Tobin's testimony. Now, we're changing gears now. This is going to be the first time you hear this, and this is excellent. Listen to this. Allen tendered William Tobin to explain the scientific community's robust criticism of the AFTE's tool mark matching methodology. The judge excluded him because he was not a quote unquote firearms expert. He was untrained in firearms identification. He did not examine the evidence in the case, and he did not conduct a firearms exam. Expert testimony should be admitted if, one, the expert is qualified by knowledge, skill, experience, training, or education, and two, will help the trier of fact to understand the evidence or to determine the fact in issue. Indiana adopted this rule to liberalize the admission of expert opinion. Tobin was clearly qualified to explain the scientific community's robust criticism of the AFTE methodology. Tobin is a nationally recognized expert in forensic metallurgy and material science who has testified as an expert in many cases involving the validity and reliability of firearms and tool marks. Hello? He has extensive experience in metallurgy, bullet and lead analysis, and tool mark principles, along with a background in statistics. He understands the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, which has issued a detailed report criticizing the AFTE methodology. In other words, he's an expert on the criticism of the shit they pulled with Allen's round. Tobin's testimony was essential for assessing Oberg's credibility. Remember, she never makes a mistake. And determining what to believe. Once an expert takes the stand, their credibility is fair game for impeachment. So Oberg was fair game for impeachment is what they're saying. The jury is ultimately responsible for assessing witness credibility and determining what to believe. Once again, strong arm tactics of Judge Francis Gull here on full display for you. Here, Oberg testified that she matched tool marks on test firings from Allen's gun with tool marks on the unspent cartridge found at the murder scene. Oberg told the jury she found agreement between the tool marks by using AFTE methodology. A lay juror might find this testimony impressive and coherent, but AFTE's methodology is anything but straightforward. Tobin's experience would help a jury understand the scientific community's criticism of AFTE's subjective methodology and force Oberg to engage with that critique. You see, that's an important point. In other words, Tobin's expert testimony would have given a counter or a alternative consideration to the jury, or more perspective, which should be wanted, right? If you want the jury to come to an informed decision, it would have been appropriate to allow the jury to be informed of an alternative explanation, or a more have more context in the form of criticism of this particular methodology that was used. Even if our rules tolerated, or Indiana rules tolerated Tobin's exclusion, the decision was patently unconstitutional. A defendant is entitled to a meaningful opportunity to complete a complete defense. A meaningful. So imagine this appeals this appellate attorney here is saying this exclusion of Tobin was patently unconstitutional. That's strong language. That a defendant is entitled to a meaningful opportunity to present a complete defense. This entitles him to impeach Melissa Oberg's tool mark analysis. The court committed reversible error by admitting hearsay to rehabilitate the timeline upon which the state built its entire case. Meaning, at trial, Allen called Eldridge, a former FBI forensic examiner who examined the data from Liberty German's phone and testified that wired headphones or an auxiliary cable were plugged into the phone at 5:45 p.m. on February 13, which is the same time that someone leaves the crime scene. Remember, I made a lot of noise about that? And then removed from the phone at 10:32 p.m. She also noted data showing an incoming call moments before the headphones were inserted. This action would silence a call, suggesting someone was intentionally silencing the phone by inserting the headphones. Eldridge's evidence eviscerated the state's timeline and showed someone else committed the murders. The state responded by asking Cecil to find its iPhone expert or its phone expert whether water damage could simulate headphones being plugged into Liberty's phone. Over hearsay objection, Cecil testified he Googled it and found some unspecified non-peer-reviewed troubleshooting forums reporting that it could. Cecil's testimony was inadmissible totem pole hearsay. Inadmissible totem pole hearsay. The court committed reversible error by excluding evidence that impeached the credibility of Allen's confessions. At trial, Allen sought to impeach the credibility of his confessions. The judge made three reversible errors, and we're going to go through them. Together, these decisions violated his constitutional rights to present a defense. When a defendant confesses, the manner in which the confession was obtained is relevant to the confession's credibility. Hello? First error, the court, Judge Gull, erred by excluding the audio from Allen's solitary confinement videos. This was reversible error. The audio shows a delusional, confused, and disorganized mind. The evidence can only be fully appreciated by listening to his utterings. Furthermore, the judge committed reversible error in prohibiting the jury from hearing two phone calls Allen made on April 3rd, 2023. The judge prohibited the jury from hearing the calls that bookended this call to his mother discussing finding religion, where Allen questioned his sanity and the veracity of his own statements. Trooper Harshman's testimony made the error worse. Over objection, Harshman claimed that when confessing, Allen was consistently calm, subdued, and solemn in tone, showing no indication of duress or stress. But the excluded bookended calls discredit that testimony. Allen was confused and forgetful in those. He believed he was losing his mind, that IDOC was poisoning him. He referred to being mentally tortured and compared his environment to Guantanamo Bay. So do you understand now why the judge excluded those particular two phone calls? Because they show that immediately prior and immediately after, when Harshman is saying that he's calm, subdued, and solemn and no indication of duress or stress, immediately before and after, he's saying he's confused, he's forgetful, he's questioning his own sanity, he's believing he's losing his mind, the IDOC is poisoning him, he's mentally tortured, he's comparing the fucking facility to Guantanamo Bay. Independently, this error was harmful and warrants reversal. In closing, the prosecutor told the jury Allen was started confessing on April 3rd because he had given himself to Jesus. The excluded April 3rd call tells a very different story, that Allen was losing his mind, showing lapses in memory, and confusing dreams with reality. The prosecutor got to offer an inculpatory story for how the confession started, while Allen and his attorneys were prohibited from presenting an exculpatory story through contemporaneous evidence. In other words, no defense. Number three, the Judge Gold, trial court, erred by excluding the statements and behaviors that provided the foundation of Dr. Grazian's opinion that Allen's confessions were not credible. Again, of course, she's going to railroad the guy and exclude everything. At trial, Dr. Grazian testified that Allen suffered from delirium, but the judge prohibited Dr. Grazian from discussing statements that provided the foundation for the opinion, including Allen's statements that were patently false. This was reversible error. First, Allen's false statements were not hearsay. He offered the statements to show his state of mind and prove that he was saying things unworthy of belief. Second, even if hearsay, the statements were admissible under Evidence Rule 703, which provides experts may testify to opinions based on inadmissible evidence, provided that it is of the type reasonably relied upon by experts in the field. Third, his statements were admissible because the state opened the door 3 times. Trooper Harshman testified that Allen's confessions were consistent with the facts and included details only the killer would know. The state also paraded witnesses before the jury who opined that Allen's mind was intact when he confessed and that he was faking his symptoms. Remember, those are your prison guards and your MK Ultra doctors at the prison. Allen was entitled to counter all of this with evidence that his statements were false, inconsistent with the murder scene, inconsistent with delirium or psychosis. So, do you understand the amount of railroading, strong arming, and bias that is being clearly laid out here and was clearly exhibited by the state in this trial? Again, this is the unveiling of the trial. The trial court committed reversible error in denying Allen's motion to correct error. Allen timely filed a motion to correct error, arguing the state elicited false testimony and allowed it to go uncorrected. The 14th Amendment is violated when the prosecution knowingly solicits false testimony and knowingly allows it to go uncorrected. According to Dr. Walla, Allen confessed that he was attempting to grape the girls but abandoned his efforts and fled with them across the creek when he saw a van. At trial, the state elicited testimony from Brad Weber, who told the jury he left work at Subaru in Lafayette, Indiana around 2:02 on February 13th and drove his white cargo van directly home. Okay, then they go through a timeline. The trial court committed reversible error when it excluded Allen's evidence explaining that this murder was a ritual killing. The trial court prohibited Allen from explaining the murder scene as a ritualistic killing. This was reversible error. Evidence which tends to show that someone else committed the crime logically makes it less probable that the defendant committed the crime and thus meets the definition of relevance. Here, Allen tendered Dr. Dawn Perlmutter, a globally recognized expert in ritualistic killings and atypical homicides, the expert on the topic, to explain elements of ritualistic killings. According to Perlmutter, this murder scene included all of the elements of ritualistic killings. Textbook. And you see it here. I'm not going to go through it again, but you see it. Perlmutter had the knowledge, skill, and expertise to offer this testimony. Expert testimony should be admitted if the expert is qualified by knowledge, skill, expertise, training, or education, and the testimony will help the trier of fact to understand the evidence or determine the fact in an issue. Here, Dr. Perlmutter is an expert in ritualistic killings and a recognized federal subject matter expert on atypical homicides and ritualistic crime investigations. Keep in mind, she usually testifies on the behalf of the prosecutor or the state. She is known as a state expert on the subject matter of ritualistic killings. So why is she not good enough for this one? Perlmutter's testimony was not conjecture. There was always a discussion among law enforcement that this may be a ritualistic murder and that the sticks were Nordic runes. And an undercover officer familiar with runes also found pagan symbolism at the scene. Perlmutter's testimony would be helpful to the jury. Although motive is not an element of murder, juries want an explanation for the crime scene. Similarly, when a murder scene is complex or unusual, it is important the jury receive an explanation. Here, the murder scene was complex and highly unusual, and the jury would want an explanation. The sticks immediately stand out to any rational person as unusual and warranting an explanation. Perlmutter's testimony provides an answer, explains the scene, and offers a motive. Her testimony would have been helpful to a jury. Excluding Dr. Perlmutter violated the Constitution. Furthermore, the trial court denied Allen his right to show the state's investigation was incomplete, overlooked plausible leads, and mishandled evidence. This is called impeaching of the investigation. A defendant is entitled to have his own case proved beyond reasonable doubt. Here, Allen presented evidence that the states performed an incomplete investigation, mishandled and destroyed evidence, and overlooked plausible third-party leads connected to pagan rituals. After examining the scene, several officers believed it was too complex for just one person to be involved, and the Carroll County Sheriff immediately thought the sticks were related to pagan rituals. The day the girls went missing, law enforcement learned that Abigail Williams was having a secret relationship with Logan Holder, the son of Brad Holder. That week, law enforcement interviewed Holder and his friend Patrick Westfall. They both ended up being pagan leaders or ministers of a local group that was practicing rituals in the woods in Delphi involving animal sacrifice and bloodletting. So what I like to do so I'd like you to look at this behind me. I'd like you to look at this, right? Look at this crime scene. Understand the crime scene a little better than this shows you. Go dig into it. Okay? Furthermore, go read this document that we just read tonight, the appellate brief here. So my opinion, I'd like to give it now. I tried to go through and highlight for you the absolutely most concerning and appalling elements of this view of the trial. I think that there are many omissions, as I mentioned. It's odd that Elvis Fields and Josh Chrisman are not mentioned at all. Neither is or are Elvis Fields' sisters and the Confessions. Neither is mentioned Reese Davis's version of Ron Logan and Keegan Kline's story, which implicated themselves. Neither are mentioned any of the other handful of confessions that exist in discovery and are known about out here in the general public. As I mentioned before, you know that everything peripheral that we consider foundational and others would label as conspiratorial, all of that was excluded from this entire thing. It doesn't appear in any of this, almost as if Baldwin and Rozzi were completely unaware of it. Am I confident that the girls arrived at that place in time? 1:30, 1:45 on February 13th, and were dropped off by the sister and were just alive and well and fine and went to the bridge? No, I'm not. Am I confident that those screams at 2 a.m. that were blood curdling that law enforcement refused to go look at, that wasn't one of the victims or one of the people involved in this? No, I'm not. Am I confident that that Snapchat of Abby on the bridge is legitimate? No, I'm not. Am I confident that the bridge guy video is even authentic or real or not staged? No, I'm not. Am I confident that all the witnesses were telling the truth? No, I'm not. There's so many things that if you zoom out and consider the cloud of suspicion over Delphi, none of this important stuff was even mentioned. This shack back here that I think was involved in this crime, it's not mentioned at all. You didn't hear the word shack one time. The sleepover, the week prior, Kyla Brummett, the wiping of Libby's phone, the phone that Abby was in possession of, the painting of the bedroom at the Patty residence, the Anthony Schatz connections, all of the individuals connected to Anthony Schatz, the girls' connections to Anthony Schatz, Keegan himself saying that they were going to meet that day, and they did, by the way. The goats' heads hanging in Ron Logan's trees. The bones Eric Williams described as hanging in the trees all in the area. The cave, the shack. Wilson Bridge. A bunch of tweakers tweaking. None of it makes sense. But as you know, that's a potential for a future time, because this is all about appealing what did happen in this case, in this courtroom. So, of course, all of the people who don't want us to think about those important things, they will keep us hyperfixated on this. But we have to have the ability to hyperfixate on multiple things so we can deep dive into this, understand it, and then we can continue to understand the bigger picture. Now, as I mentioned before, think of what's excluded. Okay? Now, even with all of that considered, I think that there is a lot of encouragement to take from this, because I was honestly startled at reading through this, because in essence, it echoed or repeated so much of what we've been saying for these past several years, almost in lockstep. Remember, we experienced it linearly in real time. These people are experiencing it in retrospect, but we went through it all. Remember how we questioned this PCA? We found all these problems with the PCA, right? And remember, we questioned the detention at Westville and all of that. And then we questioned the lead up to trial. And then we questioned what was happening in trial. And then we questioned the deliberations of the jury. And then we questioned the sentencing and now the post sentencing. So we have stepped through all of this in real time. And so reading through this, there's a lot of encouragement that comes from it, that a lot of what we've been saying this entire time is being echoed by these attorneys, Mark Lehman, Stacey Uliana. So that's something to be grateful for and to acknowledge that at a bare minimum, Stacey and Mark have raised many of the issues that we've been raising over the past years. So for those of you who feel destitute or hopeless or untrusting of these attorneys or their motivations in terms of these two appellate attorneys, I don't know what to tell you other than acknowledge the fact that at a bare minimum, they've raised many of the issues that we've raised over time, and they've done it in the way that they have to do it. So, at a minimum, those issues were heard. Now, although some may be excluded, there's a possibility that should an appeal be granted, that will be of use in the future. So everything excluded from this particular appellate brief does not mean it's permanently excluded on into the future. It's just it means it was not raised in these series of issues that were raised. But I think looking through this, that so much was raised with such a high bar, or if you want to say it inversely, a low bar, that there is a very good likelihood, because we've studied this. We know that in Indiana, there's a 9 point something percent chance of an appeal, which nationwide is more like 10%, but Indiana is a little more conservative. It's more like 9 point something percent of all appeals are successful in this way. However, looking at this, it looks overwhelming, which makes sense if you consider the fact that there was such blatant strong arming and bias exhibited during the course of this entire thing. So as we look into it, it's to be expected that this appeal is going to have a much higher chance than most other appeals, because most other appeals are more unsubstantiated, where this appeal is absolutely substantiated. As a matter of fact, they left a lot of stuff out. So I think we're at a place now where it's very likely that that there will be correction, and likely, I am assuming bare minimum. Well, I have to give it some caveats. I would say bare minimum, there will be hearings. Okay. Most likely, though, I think a new trial, which leads to a whole other series of questions. Should this judge, this same judge, and should this same prosecutor be allowed to conduct a new trial? Because it is, in my opinion, if they've done it once, they'll do it again. This new trial, if it is granted or ordered, will have to be run by a new prosecutor, a special prosecutor, and a special judge, another special judge. Because otherwise, you can't expect anything but more of the same. And I would suggest that the jury come from the locality where the crime happened, not from the jurisdiction of the judge, where there's a good likelihood the judge can have some behind the scenes uh, uh, finaglings to get a jury that is tainted or biased or fixed which also appears to be part of this. I think there's some jury fixing, and there's an obvious like judicial bias, and there's a prosecutorial and law enforcement misconduct. So altogether, we got the result we got. This is my opinion. Now, on a personal note, I'd like to say to you all that this has been a difficult period for me. And I'm sure you're aware that it's also been a difficult period for my buddies, Rick Snay and Noe Amos. And the truth about this is that we all need your support, okay? Noe, Rick, and I are all in need of your support at this point in time in different ways. Noe is slated to be out in a month and have to start his life over. Rick is attempting to rebuild his life. And yours truly, the prof here, is in the midst of absolutely difficult medical and logistical problems. So I am in need of your help. We are all three in need of your help in different ways. I know that for Noe, you can make arrangements to put together a fund for Noe. I would help facilitate uh, who you can contact. I know Carol and Diana are probably two good ones to contact if you would like to start to contribute to Noe's rebuilding when he gets out. Rick Snay, you can go to Delphi After Dark and find his contact info in how he'd like to receive support if you'd like to go help Rick. And if you'd like to support me, I'm going to share the screen here. Let's see if I can. I'd like to send you all to my Cash App that's scrolling below or the GoFundMe. And let me show you my GoFundMe here. This is at Donate to the Prof's Podcast True Crime News at GoFundMe, okay? You can find this on my link tree or in my About Me section. If you'd like to support me, this might be a good way to do it, is over here at the GoFundMe, or obviously what's scrolling below there at the Cash App is absolutely a wonderful thing. I get it immediately at the Cash App. So if you'd like to support me, I really do need it right now. I can't really go into much about my personal issues, but I've been diagnosed with a severe health issue, which is part of the reason I've been gone the past couple months. I am currently working on that. And additionally, there are logistical issues here that I am in an extreme crunch right now to handle logistical issues, compounded with the medical issues. So Rick, Noe, and I all need your help, particularly in way of financial support in the different ways you can. So I'll ask you to help with that if you feel so inclined. And if you're in the live chat, I want to thank you so much for being here. And on the replay, I love to thank everyone who watches on the replay, leaves comments down below. I truly appreciate it. And I hope you enjoyed my opinions here on this appellate filing. I truly do appreciate you taking the time to listen to my opinion. I've been in this a while, and I wanted to give the community something of value other than just a read through, which you guys can clearly go do yourself. And I'd like to thank our super chatters this evening. Speaking of donations, because I know that there were super chats, but I didn't see the chat as I was reading. But I'd like to thank everyone personally, including Oleg Cat, ACV, Ninja Warrior Assassin, Sweet Southern Nicole Watt, Deb 731, Mark Ellis, Rebecca Ann, Swade Smith, Tammy Martin, and my favorite, It's a New Day. Okay, so thank you all so much for everything. And until next time, God bless. Hug your kids, hug your wife. All right, thank you for the support, and God bless Libby and Abby.
not productive. It's kind of gross and icky.
Bruh. Legally blind.
It's not productive. It's kind of gross and icky.
Bruh. I'm legally blind.